Podcasting worldwide from a studio inside global headquarters of RP Enterprises in Kansas City.
Hey, gang! Ladies and gentlemen, Papa's home!
This is the Papa Ron Podcast.
File transfer in progress.
With Ronnie Phillips and Jillian Gregg.
Showtime.
All right, welcome back. Episode 34 of the Papa Ron Podcast, and brought to you by Brown Piercy Cattle Company. You know, Jillian, I got to tell you that I made a meatloaf the other day.
You did?
I did. I made a meatloaf. I'm not, I like to do steaks and burgers and all those things, but I'm not usually a meatloaf guy. I tried a meatloaf, and the recipe was not your mama's meatloaf. That's what it was called.
My mom's is really good, though. You would want to have her recipe.
I would like to try that sometime. And so with the Brown Piercy Cattle Company's hamburger, we did the not your mama's meatloaf. Instead called it, it's your papa's meatloaf. See what I did there?
Oh, my gosh.
Oh, hang on. Okay.
Wait a minute. Another business venture on the way.
Exactly.
Right?
Anyway, Brown Piercy Cattle Company, for years they've been breeding registered Angus cattle for generations with one thought in mind: quality beef for consumers. Their goal is to deliver prime graded beef directly to consumers' homes more affordably than you can purchase them at the store. Better beef, conveniently delivered at a lower price than the grocery store. Find them online, brownpiercycattle.com. We are really excited to have this gentleman in studio for another episode of the Papa Ron Podcast. I guess I'll start off by saying, just as a reminder, or maybe you're relatively new to the Papa Ron Podcast, and so if you are, thank you for checking it out. In episode 1, I describe and explain how this Papa Ron Podcast ever became a thing, and it was because I had a struggle with mental illness. That it's so hard to say or admit even now after the many times that I've talked about it on this podcast. But I had a struggle, and I had a friend challenge me to do the podcast, and it was an opportunity to find self-worth again. And it's a long story, but the short of the story is that now this podcast, while it was intended to be medicine for me, has become an opportunity to be medicine for many others through my testimony. And so through all of that, Heartland Bowhunter and Heartland Waterfowl are having another Heartland Premier event coming up on June 17th with the Charity Golf Classic, the Heartland Premier Charity Golf Classic on June 16th at Adams Point in Blue Springs. Last year, our beneficiary was Restoration House, now known as Rehope, where we raised almost over $20,000. Actually, not almost. We did. We raised like $23,000 for them. And we were looking at seeing who we could potentially partner with this year. And Sean and I have, I'm going to be careful what I say here. Sean has opened up to me about some of the struggles that he's had. I don't think that he would be too uncomfortable with me saying that, but I'll leave it at that. And so Sean and I talked about potentially finding an organization that would allow us to bring more awareness and maybe provide even resources to those who are struggling with depression, anxiety, or maybe suicidal ideation, or just any of the many stresses that come with everyday life in today's society. So I reached out to Abundant Life, who is a church that Jillian and I attend in Lee Summit, and one of their people, Jeff Cox, had recommended that I speak to a guy by the name of JON Thompson of Peace Partnership, who is our guest today in episode 34 of the Papa Ron Podcast. Welcome.
It is a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yay. The cool thing that right off the bat is we were kind of linked together, not only because of what you do with Peace Partnership, but you are a passionate hunter.
Absolutely. I was born and raised in Colorado, Western Colorado, and have hunted all my life.
How old were you when you got started, do you think? Because Jillian's got kids, and her husband, Matt, got them started turkey hunting at a really young age.
Yep.
Okay, so my birthday is January 5th, and I have pictures of this. It is verifiable information. I was on my first hunting trip before 1.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, my parents introduced me to that.
What kind of hunting?
Yeah,
deer and elk.
Deer and elk. Yep. Okay.
Holy cow.
Yeah.
So was he doing like a spot and stock, and you were on like in one of those, what do you call those, Jill, where they were it's like a
backpack, but sometimes it's on the front. I don't know. There's probably a word for it. I don't know.
Yeah.
I never used
I'm
one.
really disappointed that you don't know this, Mom.
No, I tried one and I was like, this is too much. I'll just carry the baby.
Yeah.
So how did he go on an elk hunt under the age of 1?
I think that Mom just kind of kept me in camp, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Just kind
Okay,
of corralled
okay.
in camp. But I can remember I have early memories of hunting, and I just thoroughly enjoy it. I got back, actually this year, got back from a great hunt with my dad. He's 72. Pulled an elk tag, a bull elk tag for kind of an exclusive unit in Colorado.
Exclusive unit. I like how you worded that. So it's not public land.
Well, it is public land, but it's a draw system. It's a lottery draw system.
Oh,
out
that
there.
kind of exclusive.
So
gotcha.
It took him about 12 years to get this tag.
Holy moly!
Wow.
And this was was this a firearm, muzzleloader, bow?
First season rifle.
Okay.
Yeah, and he got one, so it was great.
Did he do it like first day? Was it one of those typical? It was on the last day in the final hour.
No,
just before dusk.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So we're just going to get into this like really quick. Okay. So
is this what the interview's about? Because I'm okay.
This is really random information about a counselor, but I really enjoy, and I got into it in my younger years out in Colorado. I really enjoy long range shooting.
Okay.
And so I do a lot of that. I have attended some matches here locally.
Competitions.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
PRS matches. Yeah, they're great matches. And a lot of fun, great group of guys. So I've done a little bit of that, but I just really enjoy going out and shooting long range. And my dad called me when he got this tag, and he, said, hey, so you still do that long range shooting? Yeah, Dad, I do. You still have that big elk rifle? Yeah, I still have that. Well, you'd sure be a good son if you brought that out to Colorado with you this season. I was all like, okay, Dad, I got it.
What kind of gun was it? 7 mag?
It's a 300 Norma.
Okay. Wow.
So yeah, kind of a 300 Winchester on steroids, essentially. And I got him all dialed in. I have video of this. We found located a bull that was, I think it was on about day 3 or 4 of a 5-day hunt. Okay. And in the early morning hours, he pulled the switch on it and got it. It was shot at 1,080.
Holy cow.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Or holy bull in this case.
long shot.
And he's how old?
72.
I mean, it's a great gun. You're obviously a precision shooter, so you knew what you were doing. So I forget what they call that because I'm not a long range guy, but do you have the little tool that kind of judges like what your trajectory is and what the wind is, and then you know where to tell him to aim?
Oh yeah.
What is that called? What is that little device called?
A Kestrel.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's a Kestrel that takes all of your atmospheric data, your barometric pressure.
Oh wow.
All of that stuff gets put into that. And then I was basically just tasked with getting him on target and making a first round hit. Yeah. Right. And yeah, he did it, but you still have to pull the trigger.
Sure. Right? Sure. Just squeeze it.
Yeah. And he did, and it was amazing.
He's got years of experience hunting. It's not like he doesn't know what he's doing.
Correct. Yeah. Correct. Dad's an accomplished hunter. I learned everything I know from him.
What did the bull score?
So it was not a very big bull. He was, I would say he was probably high 200s, probably.
Okay. It's respectable.
Yeah. Yeah. But it was a great hunt. This is going to be his last hunt. It was from our shooting location. It took us about 4 miles hiking down into him. There's 1,000 vertical feet of elevation that we had to traverse. And it was an all-day chore. Is
he in pretty good shape for his age? I mean, how did he do?
Great. Good. Great. Yeah. Now, there was a couple times that he said, I'm not doing this again. I've had it. Right. But yeah, he did a great job. Super impressive.
That's really cool that you got to experience that after all the years from under the age of 1, hunting with your dad and being out there with your mom, and then him saying, I'm hanging my hat up after this, to get to go and experience that with him, get content and get one. Yeah. What a special moment. I'm sure you got tons of still hero pictures with the bull.
Oh yeah. Absolutely.
Good for you. Yeah. So let's talk more hunting. No, I'm just kidding. I could do that with you all day. Anyway, so I have to admit, I talked to Sean, is also one of the guys, Sean Luchtwall, I'm speaking of, from Heartland Bowhunter. He told me shortly after Jeff Cox of Abundant Life had said that we should talk to you. Apparently, around that same time, you were a speaker at We the People of Jackson County, Missouri.
That's correct, yeah.
And Sean Luchtwall attends that regularly, and he reached out to me shortly after that and was like, man, you really got to have this John Thompson on your podcast. And I said, man, that is really weird. Like, it's almost a God thing, right? Like, I was just talking to Jeff Cox, and he was suggesting that I should have him as somebody who is a beneficiary for the premiere. So, I don't know much about your story other than what your wife Naomi had sent over kind of in a media kit, other than, that you were a at-risk teen That's pretty much what I know. But Sean said that you had an incredible message, and it was just a very fascinating story that you had to tell at We the People of Jackson County. So, Peace Partnership, I guess we're going to get into your story, but Peace Partnership, let's start there, because that's obviously what you're doing now, which is a great 501c3 organization helping out those who are less fortunate. Why don't you dive into that a little bit more?
Okay. So Peace Partnership, this June actually will be 10 years for us.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we feel very, very blessed to have been in business for that long and just helped thousands of people at this point. And I started Peace Partnership. I had worked in a psychiatric hospital back in Colorado. That's kind of how I cut my teeth and got my start.
Okay.
I've spent total about 20 years in the industry, in the mental health industry. So I was a therapist, a crisis counselor at a psychiatric hospital in the Denver area. And then we moved back here. And people often ask, like, why in the world did you move from Colorado back to the Midwest? The cost of living, right, was just really, really high out there. And so we moved back here. And I was a school counselor. The burnout rate in psychiatric hospitals is very high. And so it's just a super high stress job.
Okay.
And
I can see that.
Yeah, it's about 2 years that's the attrition rate. And I was 2.5. And then I had it, and I wanted to do something a little bit more on the proactive side of things. And so I became a school counselor.
Okay.
And I was an elementary school counselor in Grain Valley, worked for that school district for 8 years, and loved my time there, had a great time, and was not really thinking about becoming an elementary school counselor. And it was actually at the behest of my mom that I had spoken with her about it. And she said, well, why don't you take it? And there's, people shift around all the time. So maybe you can become a high school counselor at some point in your career. I thought, okay. But took it, loved it. Absolutely loved it. Worked for a wonderful woman, great lady. Kathy was her name, and just fantastic boss. Learned a whole lot. But during my time there, I was constantly conducting counseling sessions and then touching base with parents and saying, hey, it'd kind of be a good idea if your kiddo had some outside counseling, had some outside help.
Okay.
And then I would check back in with them, and the answer was the same almost all the time. And that was, John, I agree with you, but counseling is just too expensive. We just cannot afford, the going rate now is anywhere between $125 and $150 a session. So that becomes very problematic for a lot of families.
And that's for how long a session? Like 45 minutes, an hour typically? Okay.
Yep, about 45 minutes to an hour. And that's just kind of the going rate. So I became increasingly frustrated with that. And I remember at one point there was a grandmother who was raising 3 of her grandkids. And I had gone through the same spiel with her. Hey, your kiddos could really benefit from some counseling. And then I followed up with her. And I kind of pressed a little bit on, well, this would really be beneficial for them. And she was a little bit of a gruff country gal. And she just turned around and said, John, if it's a choice between groceries or counseling, groceries is going to win that fight every day.
Sure. I get it.
Yeah. And I thought, okay, touche, well said, point taken. And that's really what those two professional events, the time in the psychiatric hospital as well as my time in public education, kind of coalesced into this idea of what if people could attend counseling and they could pay what they could, not what they had to. Would that be a good idea? Would generous-minded people and organizations and businesses, would they get behind that? And we were attending Graceway at the time, and my wife and I, and our Sunday school teacher, we were really good friends with him. And he's now the president of our board, Rick. And we went out and I pitched my idea, and it just came about in the natural course of conversation. And he said, yeah, we should do that. And I thought, what do you mean we should do that? Like, this is a lot of money to get this started.
Yeah.
And he said, well, we should do that. Can you find good counselors? Well, yeah, but there's a lot into that. And I had no idea, but Rick is a business owner. He's a very, very generous-minded, others-focused individual. He's a mentor of mine, and we're still friends, obviously, to this day.
So it was a blessing to have Rick, who was a business owner, because typical business owners, entrepreneurs, they don't find reasons for failing. They find reasons for just jumping in and going. Like typically those who are successful, they just take an idea and they go with it. And if you fail, you fail. But somebody who doesn't have that background might be a little bit more cautious because your brain is trying to protect you for everything that could potentially go wrong. And that's what, no disrespect to you, but that's where you were at. If you wouldn't have had Rick, it may not have ever started.
Oh, absolutely. Well, and I was tenured, right, with the district. So I'm on track to, retire at 55 and, be done. And I mean, it was great. And Missouri retirement for public educators is one of the top in the nation. They've got a great retirement, program. But I just really had this idea that, man, it would really be worthwhile if I could do this, because what I have found is that life is about different things for different people. And for me, life is about finding a way. And I love to help people find a way.
That is so cool.
I see things from a different perspective. I don't know how else to say it.
Yeah.
And so I can see a problem, and I know that people have problems when they come in for counseling, but I don't see them as such. I should say, I see a giant riddle, right? That I can help this person with an aspect of this riddle in the next 50 minutes. And then the next week we can solve another aspect of this riddle. And that's just how I conceptualize it. That's just how I view it.
Okay. More about the organization, and because I was telling you before we started recording, the Pop Around podcast is a separate entity to what I'm doing with Heartland Waterfowl and Heartland Bowhunter, but fortunately I do both, and we're going to be trying to use our platforms as HB and HW to raise some money for Peace Partnership. And so at some point in this conversation, I want to dive into that and how anybody who attends the premiere or attends the golf tournament, the money that would be going to Peace Partnership, how that would be beneficiary. But before we get into that, let's go back to your youth and kind of talk about, because again, as I read the media kit, you talked about being an at-risk teen. And was it the troubles that you had along the way that inspired you to get into what you're doing today?
Yeah. So, I'm Irish, and
okay. So you look it.
I kind of come across being ornery pretty willingly, and so I was just I just was not going to be told what to do in my younger years, and that, as you can imagine, manifested itself in all sorts of ways. I was definitely in the drinking scene, the partying scene, did a lot of that. I was kicked out of my home about halfway through my senior year of high school. And so I was homeless for a little while. I lived with some friends, kind of couch surfed, that sort of thing. And it was through the course of that that I became a Christian. Because when you live that sort of a lifestyle, you just, quite frankly, you see things and you experience things that are very, very awful. Mm-hmm. And during the course of that, I thought, okay, is this as good as life gets? Is there nothing else? And that was the beginning of the turning point for me, where I thought, okay, I have to find a way to live a better life. Going through high school, I ran around with kind of a tougher crowd, and all throughout high school, I had friends either die or commit suicide. That was just kind of part and parcel of growing up. And at the time, you don't know what you don't know. Yeah. And so it was just so-and-so committed suicide, or so-and-so was, stabbed at a party and died, and, that kind of a thing. And so I thought, boy, there's gotta be, there's got to be more to life than, drinking and partying and, all of that nonsense. And so that's really what kind of got me started. And I became a Christian at 18. And one of the guys that I went to church, my mom and dad had always gone to church. It's just that I never really took it seriously. And I thought, well, I don't agree with everything that my mom and dad do, but I mean, there's no denying that they have a measurably better life than I do, right, at this point. So let's just kind of test the waters out. Let's kind of see, well, maybe I can, borrow some of their ideas, and we'll just try them on for size and see how it works.
Okay.
It turns out that when you stop digging for bedrock and start climbing, things turn around in your life.
It's an interesting way to put it.
So I tell clients now all the time, right, that if you find yourself in a pit, the first thing you should do is stop digging.
Yeah.
Right.
I shouldn't laugh at that, but
Right.
I see the analogy.
Yeah, like let's stop that first. Okay.
Yeah.
And so I kind of started to turn my life around, and the Thomas family, I played some soccer with their son, and went to church and was friends with him. Paul was his name, Paul Thomas, and his parents, Keith and Jean, took me in. They knew that I didn't have a place to stay, and so they took me in. And they had 3 boys, and their oldest son, Aaron, went to Calvary Bible College out here in Kansas City.
Oh, wow.
So this is in Grand Junction, Colorado at the time.
Okay. Yep.
And that's the link with it. That's how I came out here. And so I came out here and went to college out here.
You're 18 then. You came to Kansas City when you were 18.
I came to Kansas City when I was 19.
19. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
came to Kansas City when I was 19. And I literally thought at the time, well, if I'm going to be a Christian, I might as well be a good one. And so
I like that approach. Yeah.
Very straightforward and pragmatic, but not a lot of thought for any future aspirations. Let's say that.
Okay.
And so I came out here to Calvary because that's where Aaron was, and drove out and thought, okay, cool. This is, kind of I needed a fresh start at the time. I'd burnt a lot of bridges. And so I thought, okay, this is going to be a good thing for me. And it turned out that it was, to say it was a good thing for me is an understatement. It was the pivotal point. Looking back on it now at 47, it was the pivotal point in my life. That was a very, very gradual turning away from all of the nonsense and all of the false beliefs that I held dear. This idea is ubiquitous all throughout the Bible. In other words, it's all throughout the Old and the New Testament, this idea that there are parts of you that if you are going to become who God made you to be, there are parts of you that are not worthy to be you. And you need to rid yourself of those. And how it's stated in Scripture usually is in terms of a refiner's fire. That you get melted down. And
we talked about
Isaiah.
this with Ryan Lefevre of the Royals. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Same. Yeah. It sounds like we're reading the same thing or something. So same concept that, Isaiah talks about it, that I have, tried you in the furnace of affliction, right? It's that idea that there's pieces of you that need burned away. And that process is painful. You really have to want it. You have to be dedicated to the process of getting better. And that's what Calvary did for me.
Wow.
It was a very, very great experience. Jerry Proviance was the dean at the time, and I did counseling with him for several years. And just a great, great guy. I never saw Jerry coming. He was so slick. People see me coming in counseling.
Okay.
But he was so slick, and he would ask me, he would fit these little questions in, and you'd never see him coming. I remember one time he asked me, I'd had kind of a strained relationship, obviously, with my folks, with my parents.
Sure. And
this is, I don't know, maybe 6 to 8 months into counseling with Jerry, and we were talking, and I was complaining about my mom, like Freud said, right? If it's not one thing, it's your mother. So, I was talking about my mom. I'm complaining about her and all these awful things that she did and put me through and all these things. And he said, John, can I just interrupt you for a second? Well, what am I going to say? No.
Right.
Right. Okay. Yeah, sure. It sounds like you're going to start talking about your mom again. And I'm like, well, is the Pope Catholic? Like, yeah, of course, right? Like, she's the bane of my existence, right? Type of thing.
She's the problem.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And he said, well, I'm just wondering if I can ask you a question real quick. Oh, okay. When are you ever going to give up on the possibility of having a better past?
Oh, wow. That hit you right between the eyes.
Oh man. Yeah. And because I knew at once what he was asking. I had this slick system worked out where everything that was negative or bad that happened to me, well, that was clearly because of my folks. Right. But everything that was good that happened to me, that was clearly because I overcame what my folks had done. Right.
You're still 19 when you're experiencing this? Okay.
Yes. And so it was at that point that I realized that you have to, I'm not, and I say this to clients all the time, I'm not asking you to stop blaming. I'm asking you to start blaming like an adult. And if you're going to blame your mom and dad or your husband or your wife or your kids or whoever, your boss, whatever the case might be, if you're going to blame them for the bad, you also have to blame them for the good. You can't, life is not so black and white.
That's really good.
And you really have to do that. And again, that was part of that. That was part of that, refining process for me.
I have this problem where I do these interviews and I get all of these questions. And so I feel like I have to spit out the question before I forget it. And then I completely just dominate over Jillian and I don't give her a chance to ask any of her questions. And I see her down there just going to town, taking notes. So I want to make sure I give her an opportunity.
Well, and part of while you were talking, I was like doing some math because I was like, I wonder how old he is. And he said Calvary Bible College. Because I went to a youth retreat there. I can't remember what it was called. I know I got a t-shirt, but I don't still have the t-shirt. I think it was called Yahweh.
Kaya.
Yeah. That's what it was.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I cannot believe I remembered that, but yeah.
Kaya. Oh, I was so close. Anyway.
Wait a minute. Is that close? What did you say originally?
Yahweh
and Kaya are close?
Well, kind of.
They sound nothing alike.
Okay, so what does Kaya mean?
No, I do not know that. Okay. I think that
there was meaning to it.
Yeah, that's either a Greek or a Hebrew word that has some. Yeah,
I'm gonna look it up while I'm talking. Okay. Anyway, so I was there and I was like, "How old was I?" Well, I wasn't old enough to drive yet. I don't think. So, so doing the math, when you said how old you were, I'm like, "Well, you were probably there when I was there because I went one time, and I was either 14 or 15 because I couldn't drive yet." And I'm 43.
Okay, how fascinating.
So isn't that weird?
That like crazy.
This 1 year that I went to this, it's so crazy.
Okay. I was there. I tell people that I crammed a 4-year degree into 7. I was there from 1995 and I graduated in 2002. And then I took about a year and a half off in the middle.
Okay.
There. So yeah.
Wow.
Fascinating. Small world.
Mm-hmm.
I want to go back to your childhood because on this particular podcast, I tried to get to a point of vulnerability, or I say we, it's another problem I have. I say I so much. We try to get to a point of vulnerability where we want to pull back the curtain and dig a little deeper. So, where did the problem start? I mean, you just kind of gave a surface level, like, hey, well, I'm Irish. I was stubborn. I didn't really listen to my parents. I can't imagine that you, from the age of 5, you were just a problem child. At some point, you had some sort of influence, or did you get into substances, or did you just run in a bad crowd? Was there a particular incident with your parents that really kind of, triggered it all? Where did it all start?
So, and this is another thing that I talk to clients about a lot, especially parents. Be careful about curbing your child's stubbornness. Stubbornness can be very, very valuable, and it can be very, very useful in the right context.
Okay.
If you learn to kind of form it and shape it and have it work for you. And from an early age, and my mom would say this, from an early age, I was going to do it my way.
So you were very dependent, or independent rather.
Very independent. And I do a lot of reading, and I read a lot of old books. And the reason that I read a lot of old books is because in my opinion, I think that old books have stood the test of time. Mm-hmm. And so I'm not necessarily really interested in what a lot of, pop psychologists, say, but I am very interested in what some of the greatest minds who've ever lived have to say.
Okay.
Very interested about that. Because books can, and I'll answer your question here in just a second.
You're fine.
Okay. Books can be thought of as kind of layers, right? So if you know the source layer, then you don't have to know all of the other layers that gain their wisdom from the source.
Okay.
If that makes sense, right? So in other words, a lot of books out there reference the Bible. Well, wouldn't it be good if you knew the Bible?
Good point. Yeah.
You know, it's that sort of an idea.
Okay.
A lot of writers will reference Dostoevsky, or they'll reference a man by the name of Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who wrote a fascinating book called the Gulag Archipelago. It's actually a 3-volume book that's just dark, and it's about his 12 years in the Russian concentration camps, the gulags.
What year would that
would have been
come out?
That was right after World War II. He actually was in the Red Army and helped liberate Germany, and then they, because everybody in communism is a conspirator, and they threw him into the gulags because of it.
Wow.
Yeah, accused him of espionage or spying or something like that. So yeah.
Wow.
So I read a lot of that material, and that's what I'm primarily concerned with. And one of the guys who's a Greek philosopher, Epictetus, he wrote something that is very, very apropos to my situation when I was younger. And that is, he said that human beings can learn by 3 methods. We can learn through imitation, we can learn through observation, and we can learn through experience. And he drew the conclusion that experience is the most bitter way to learn. And so if you can learn through imitation and observation, you are exercising wisdom, which wisdom, a good working definition of wisdom would be skill in living. Like you figured some things out that other people just haven't. And because you figured that out, your life is going well.
Okay.
Right. That if you can imitate people, and if you can observe people and then draw conclusions, actionable conclusions from that, it's much, much better than to just think like, well, I'm just going to plow ahead and I'm just going to experience all of these things and I'm going to do it my own way. Right.
Okay.
Well, when I was younger, I was going to do it my own way. And
it was experience or nothing.
Exactly. Yeah. And as it turns out, that's a very bitter way to learn.
But there have to be people like you that learn that way for other people to learn by observance, and maybe not imitation if it's that you're learning something the hard way. But it's like how, or I want my kids to, like, selfishly for them, I'm like, I don't want them to learn the hard way. I don't want them to make bad choices and learn from experience, even though we know that you have to somewhat. But I'm like, I want them to see other people experience something and go, I don't want to do that. I want to do it differently, or see it a good thing. And that's how I want to do it. But that's not always, I mean, you can't like.
Well, and I think it's
there's no button to
inevitable that
push.
we're all going to, at some point in time in our life, learn something the hard way.
Yes.
Yeah, for
Yes.
sure.
Yes. And so the trick is for the parent anyway, the trick is that you want your child to learn those things when the price tag associated with the behavior is relatively small. So that they get that experience, learning kind of out of their system, like, oh, wow, that really, there were some serious consequences associated with that.
So I'm guessing what you could be meaning by that is you hear stories about kids that have basically no opportunity to make mistakes until they leave the house. Until they're 18 or until they're whatever time they leave.
Considered sheltered.
Right. And not that you shouldn't have rules at home and have consequences for things if you break the rules and that kind of thing. But I feel like I saw it a lot in friends of mine that when I was growing up, that they finally got to leave and get out on their own. And then they just went absolutely crazy.
Oh, yeah.
Because they could. And so then the consequences or the prices are higher than with nobody to come back to, because a lot of times they couldn't go back home.
Yes.
They couldn't go back to their parents for, even if it was like, oh, I really messed up, and just for comfort or bail them out, whatever that looked like, whether that was actually bailing them out of jail or whatever the case may be,
or just shame, that they didn't want their parents to see how bad they screwed up. And
right.
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah. And that's a key component of it, is that, we need to learn these things, but we don't need to learn them when the price tag associated with them is so sky high that it can just be life changing. Learn it when you're young. And it's really fascinating that, we're our culture is becoming more and more attuned to raising kids in this environment of just comfort and convenience. And, we don't bow down before, stone gods, anymore. I mean, we're much more advanced than that, but we do bow down before comfort and convenience. That's our God today.
Yeah, seems like it.
And so it's saying, no. We're going to be, as parents, we're going to be very intentional about stepping away from that and giving kids the necessary resistance in life that helps them develop that character.
Right. I see it in parents, and these are not big consequences, not big prices, but I'll see parents of little kids that, this is just an example, they maybe take them to church for a special service or for a funeral or for a wedding, and maybe they've never sat, and that's not even like you don't go to church regularly, but they've never been made to sit still and be quiet just because it's the respectful thing to do without having a tablet in their hand. Like, they don't have to sit at a restaurant and just behave and do what you're supposed, and observe that, when we're at the table at a restaurant, we just talk and visit, and maybe you get to color or draw. But to have something all the time that you're glued to, well, then that at some point that's not going to work anymore. And so then if you're constantly like entertaining to keep them from disrupting or doing something, well, then at some point in their life, they're not going to get to have a tablet in their hand, and they're going to have to know how to act. And then that's going to look weird when they're whatever age and they can't.
No, you're right.
Do what they need to do in a given situation. Does that make sense?
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
And that could even be like out of high school and into college or out on the job force. Like my kids will come home and be like, I had to do a project and and they were so annoying. And no, I was doing most of the work. I'm like, that's life.
Welcome to it.
Life. It's going to be that way your whole life. You're going to work with someone who's difficult, or you're going to be the difficult person for someone else, or what, like that's, sorry.
Yeah.
That's just life. That's
absolutely. There is a great book out. This is a shameless plug for a random book. Great book out there. And this is a recent book. So here I am being a hypocrite saying like, I read old books. And, well, I just read a lot. Let's just say that. But it's a book called Glow Kids, GLOW.
Okay.
Glow Kids, great book. And it is on technology and screen addiction. Really, really good book. I recommend recommend that to anybody who will listen to me. I think it's probably the most clinically significant book that I've read in the past 10 years.
Wow. That's saying something.
Yes, really.
Especially somebody who reads as much as you do.
Very, very significant. He actually did his PhD work on screen addiction. He has a huge clinic up in New York State, and fascinating findings. Here's just a little tidbit of information. A lot of big-time Silicon Valley execs that work for Yahoo and Google and Microsoft, all these things, they send their own kids to very elite Waldorf schools in Palo Alto, California, and they are not low-tech schools, they're no-tech schools. Yeah.
What's that tell you?
So very, very interesting that, all these executives are pushing all kinds of technology onto public education, but then with their own, no, it's not low tech, it's no tech.
No tech.
Yeah. And that
kind of just made my stomach churn a little bit. I guess I'm really surprised to hear that. And it almost sounds like a drug dealer who doesn't want to give their kids drugs. Yeah. Like, hey, it's good for everybody else, but don't let my family or anybody I love have it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's a fascinating book, and you'll read through it. I mean, I think I read through it in 2 days. It's a fascinating read.
I got to admit, and I'm just being raw, and I hope that my wife she's probably going to kill me for saying this, but we are those parents that are, it's cringing me to say it, that lets our kids spend way too much time in front of the screen.
Well, and
it's easy to do.
It is. It absolutely is. And so what I tell parents is this, as I go around and because I do quite a bit of public speaking too. And so what I tell parents is this: don't view technology in terms of right or wrong, view it in terms of power. You would never give a 16-year-old who just got their license a Ferrari. Why would you not do that? Well, it's got an 800 horsepower engine. Like, they're going to get in trouble with it. It's just too powerful. Technology is the same way. We have a supercomputer in our pocket.
Yeah.
And so they need to be managed on it. They need all of that. And there's a lot of research, and it's cited in that Glow Kids book, but there's a lot of research out there that points to exactly that. People in my field, a lot of top minds in the fields of psychology and psychiatry are being siphoned off and not going into the trenches and actually helping people, but they're going to work for video game companies. And as video games will be in their development stages, then they will have certain psychological benchmarks like heart rate, blood pressure, all these different types of things that they want study participants to hit while they're playing the game. And if they don't, and if they don't, it's back to the drawing board. Wow. They want you playing their game 24/7. The executive of Netflix, or the former executive of Netflix, I think, was quoted as saying that our only competition is time.
Yeah.
Right? Or sleep. I think he said our only competition is sleep.
Makes sense.
Right?
Wow.
So, yeah.
So whoever invented that little thing on Netflix that is like, goes to the next episode, it doesn't really give you a choice. I mean, you do have a choice. You can turn it off.
Yeah.
But I mean, how brilliant, like whoever.
YouTube is the same way.
Yeah. Right. That the next thing, it just comes. It's just going to come, and and then knowing what you like to watch and
and that's
building off of that.
What they're doing is they're playing off of human psychology, because the brain is, in one sense, it can be thought of as a binary machine, right? It only thinks in ones and zeros. It only wants the dopamine hit. It does not think in terms of context. Okay, that's why people get in all kinds of trouble in terms of there's two different types of addictions. There's process addictions and ingestive addictions. Ingestive addictions are things that you take, things that you ingest, drugs, alcohol, that kind of thing.
Okay.
And then process addictions would be pornography, gambling, things that you do. Okay. So a little side note. Okay. But
what's that called again?
Process addictions.
Process addiction.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So process addictions and ingestive addictions. And they're playing off of our current understanding of addictive tendencies, is that the brain does not think in context. The brain doesn't think, hey, this makes us feel good, but it's also destroying our life. Well, it doesn't think that way. It just thinks like, hey, I want the dopamine hit.
Yeah,
that's
dopamine.
it.
That damn dopamine.
I know, right?
That damn dopamine. I mean, who doesn't get at some point? I mean, maybe this isn't fair to say, but I've definitely been guilty of the dopamine that you get on social media, and seeing, like, it was maybe more so back when, I first got involved with it. Like, you put some content out there, like who's commenting on it, or you're putting it out there so you can get it commented, or you want to put something out there about politics because you want to get into a pissing match. I was terrible at that. Terrible. I mean, I did it for just to poke the bear more, but it was the dopamine. It was like, oh, who can I get in a spat with? Who's liking all of my content? Who's, like, that's getting dopamine.
Absolutely.
I did not expect this conversation to go down this road, but I'm glad we did. And let me just also clarify, because I'm starting to get an anxiety attack, that my wife does actually from time to time say, you're not going to spend your entire day on the phone. You're going to go play with your toys or going outside, so she's going to say, well, don't put me in that circle. But, the thing that I find with the whole technology and the kids is that it's sometimes like, just take your phone and give me a break, and if I could just get some peace and quiet. And if he's on his phone, he's quiet, he's engaged. And like those stuff he's watching is Blippy, or YouTube Kids or stuff. Sure. And the one thing I'm not trying to make an excuse for what you're saying, because I think it's all very valid. But I have found from even my daughter, because she was that person who would watch the YouTube content or the PBS Kids and stuff, like, there's some educational stuff that you can get from that helps you intellectually.
Sure. Absolutely.
Can you speak on that, so that we all, parents that use technology with their kids, don't feel like that we're sending them down the road of failure?
Yeah. Well, even Blippy, though, is educational. Like,
yeah,
I mean,
no, for sure.
Like, it's fascinating. I don't know if you've ever watched Blippi.
Do you know
right?
Blippi?
I do not know
Okay.
Blippi. No, yeah,
you should. He dresses like he's. Anyway, I'm joking. Go ahead.
Right. Well, he dresses ridiculously because he's
He
appealing
acts
to
ridiculously.
to little kids, right? Like
Okay.
he wears
It's
like
entertaining.
a beanie and suspenders, bright colors. But what I think is cool about him, and I haven't watched him a lot. My niece kind of went through a phase a while back, but from what I could tell, it reminded me of a little bit of a modern day Mr. Rogers, and I love Mr. Rogers.
Oh, that's a really good analogy.
Oh my gosh. I
Okay.
just
Yeah.
I wish I could have met Mr. Rogers because it was ingenious. Like if you've ever seen the documentary or the movie about him, that he just did normal everyday things. And he's like, kids need to see that. Some kids in their home don't and on his show, he had a fish tank and he fed the fish every day. And he's like, some kids don't have that.
Yeah.
Some kids don't have that, like someone else depending on them and the responsibility that it is to feed the fish every day because the fish can't feed itself. And I think he said one day on a show, he was walking by the fish tank and forgot to feed the fish. And he said, you wouldn't believe, and this was back before like email and stuff, we got so many letters from kids who were concerned that I forgot to feed the fish. And he said it was just fascinating that the small things that like kids noticed. And so Blippi kind of does this, like, it might be that they're going to go, it's something very normal. Like he might, I don't know, it might not be a copy machine, but there's a copy machine in front of us. So it might be like, let's see how a copy machine works or let's see how a bulldozer works. And then it's just the very like basic whatever that maybe some kids already know that, but maybe some don't, So anyway, sorry. I know I kind of hijacked that question, but
No.
Blippi's impressive to me.
I guess where
Even
I
though
was
he's kind of
ultimately saying is that I think that I could probably do better as a father to, and then maybe it's just laziness on my part. I think I'm a lazy dad, but I think that there are times where I'm just exhausted.
Yeah.
And, I'm older.
yeah.
It's harder to get up and off the floor to play with Tonka toys, and
Right.
so
Or
like,
the thought of like
just watch your phone for a little bit.
getting out a craft project. Like, can we draw or can we get out the markers or the paint? Or like my kids always wanted to paint. And I'd be like,
Oh, I know.
oh, painting.
Reagan always wants to make
God.
slime. And I'm like, oh, do we have to make it such a
know.
mess?
I know, right? Like the mess is just like, oh my gosh, do we have to make a mess today?
John, do you have
Yeah.
kids? I guess we need to. Have you experienced any of this?
I do not have kids.
I'm sure we're giving you reasons not to have any now.
No, that was a very intentional early on decision that I made because I knew that I knew that I had found my calling in counseling. I knew that this is what I wanted to do, but I also knew that I'm not a moderation guy, unfortunately.
Okay.
I'm all in or I'm all out. And so I knew I was going to be doing this.
that and try to do the balance with a family.
Right.
Wow. Yeah, I
Yes.
can imagine. That was really smart of you to premeditate that.
Yeah.
Before just doing it.
Yes. And one of the things I do, so I kind of have two things going on professionally. So I'm the executive director of Peace Partnership from 8 to 5. And then I'm also, I've got a little side gig, which is a counseling little LLC, Genesis Counseling.
Okay.
And so I do that for people that do not fit Peace Partnership's financial model. Okay. So it's just fee for service, just people that can come in and they can afford to pay.
And you do that every night?
I do that every night. And so my average work week, I work 4 11-hour days, Monday through Thursday. I work an 8-hour day Friday, and I'll routinely teach on Saturday and or Sunday. And I've just done that.
How are you still married?
Well, I work with my wife. So,
is she in the same profession? I mean, I know that she helps out, but I didn't know that she was a counselor also.
well, she's not a counselor, but she is the director of development for Peace Partnership.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, but then you say you work with your wife every day. Then I also say, how are you still married?
Good point.
No disrespect. No.
Yeah, good point.
Wow.
Yeah, and
That's
we really had some some serious conversations about this is either going to be a good thing or we're going to get a divorce.
Yeah.
And so let's avoid the divorce.
Right.
Yeah.
And so we really had to have a heart-to-heart conversation. It's like, okay, if we're going to start working together, we have to be open and vulnerable and honest with one another in terms of, is this working?
Mm-hmm.
And that was 9 years ago.
Okay.
So, yeah.
My question a while back was how you got to be that at-risk kid, like that. And then we kind of got, down this road. So are you comfortable kind of telling your story in all the trials and tribulations that you had? I think what you're ultimately just saying is that you were that kid who, was going to do it your way. And basically your mother maybe had difficulty understanding that, and not that she's a bad mom. I'm sure you love your mom and you have a great relationship. I'm not trying to speak disparagingly against her. She just only knew what she knew, and the two didn't mesh. And that's where it all kind of started. Is that fair to say?
That's absolutely fair to say. Yeah.
Okay.
We grew up, mom and dad did the best they could, but we were definitely kind of on the maybe lower middle class, kind of rode that poverty line right there. Mom and dad, lots of times they were working 2 jobs, sometimes 3. And I, vividly remember that. And mom and dad, again, did a great job, but that was just part of growing up.
You just knew what you knew.
Yeah, that was just part of life.
So let's dive into your personal life a little bit when we come back. Oops, wrong button. We're going to dive into your personal life here in a little bit when we come back from the break, because I want to get to know you a little bit better. I think that there are probably parents out there who are trying to understand, like, what am I doing wrong? And maybe your story, your testimony might bring some awareness to them. So let's talk about that when we come back. It's episode 34 with Jon Thompson on the Papa Ron Podcast.
You're listening to the Papa Ron Podcast. To contact us with questions, comments, or interest in sponsoring the show, find us online at paparonradio.com.
Downloading.
Now back to the show. Here again are your hosts, Ronnie Phillips and Jillian Gregg.
I'd also like to remind you to check out heartlandbowhunter.com. You can also check out heartlandwaterfowl.com. But there at heartlandbowhunter.com, you're going to find information about the Heartland Premier event that is coming up on June 17th at the Stony Creek Hotel and Convention Center, or Conference Center. I can't remember if it's convention or conference, but it's the same thing. And then we're going to have our 2nd annual Charity Golf Classic at Adams Point and Blue Springs that Friday, June 16th. And that charity golf tournament, again, is to benefit Peace Partnership, which is what we're talking about here today with Jon Thompson, who's the executive director in studio with us. So before we went to break, talking about your childhood, you found out at an early age that you were kind of I'm going to do it my way type of guy. That didn't sit well with your mom. And then did it just kind of spiral year after year after that? Did you end up, you said you got kicked out. So at some point they just got sick and tired of being sick and tired and booted you. Was there something significant that happened that took him to that level? I mean, how bad were you really?
Okay. Well, it depends on what school administrator you ask.
Okay.
So it really kind of started in middle school for me. And I definitely, I definitely would have been diagnosed with kind of that conduct disorder, very, very just kind of antisocial, did not care what other people thought. I was going to be the class clown. I was going to have fun. I was going to, like, if I, not uncommon at all, go to school just absolutely drunk, could barely walk.
Wow.
Yeah, that was not uncommon in high school. But it kind of started back in middle school just with really bad friends and bad choices.
Okay.
And that's really kind of where it started. And I already had that propensity just to kind of be on the wild side. And it's one of those things that you just have to learn to manage. And that's, like I said earlier, it's not necessarily a bad thing if people are stubborn, but it's what you're stubborn for. Why are you stubborn for all the wrong things, John? It was that idea.
Okay.
And early on, I got, they do IQ testing for lots of kids, and I qualified for the gifted program, and evidently I was really smart and just bored. And so for kids, especially young boys, if you're 10 years old, you're 12 years old, and you're required to sit in a classroom for, 6, 7, 8 hours a day, it's hell. It's just torture.
Yeah.
It's absolutely torture. And then they say, like, well, your kid probably might have ADHD or something like that. No, they don't. They don't.
Right.
You know what they have?
It seems like anymore in today's society, it's like, well, if there's a problem, then now they got to diagnose it with some sort of new term where we never talked about ADHD or OCD or any of this stuff when we were, not that those aren't real things, but aren't they overly diagnosed anymore in today's society? We didn't know anything about this when I was a kid growing up.
Yes, absolutely. And the reason for that, the reason that they're overdiagnosed is because the majority of diagnoses are brought on by teachers. And teachers, again, they're not trying to do this. It's not like they're meeting in some darkly lit room and they're, conspiring against kids.
Let's try to get 7
Not all
kids
of them, anyway.
diagnosed today.
Exactly. Right. There's this secret Illuminati of teachers.
Rewards program. They got a punch card. They got 2 more today. No, it's not how it works.
Yeah. Get 10 diagnosed, get 1 free,
I wouldn't doubt it in the COVID world that we had. But I digress. Sorry. I went down another rabbit hole. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. So a lot of teachers, because they are overworked and because they have huge class sizes, 25, 27, 30 kids in a classroom, a lot of ADHD diagnoses in the United States are made by teachers ultimately. Right now, teachers, they kind of have a slick system worked out, because you as an educator, you cannot say point blank, hey, I think you should have your kid tested for this, because then the school district is then on the hook financially to have that testing done.
Oh.
So they're very
That's
careful.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, they're very careful in how they word things, but ultimately about 80%, about 8 out of every 10 ADHD referrals come from teachers. And it's for the sole purpose of compliance in the classroom. That's what it's for.
Yeah.
And that, in my mind, that's a problem.
That is a huge problem.
That's a problem. Why are we continuing to do things like kids come off of a conveyor belt? We're continuing to educate people like they come off of a conveyor belt, and they don't. But we continue to do that.
The same kinds of things. And this is not saying that all teachers are doing anything wrong or all school districts are doing things wrong. And so what I'm going to compare it to is not saying this about doctors either, but the same kinds of things happen that in general, they're going to make well, this is the symptom. This must be what it is. Here's the medicine that works for it. Let's just do that, because then that kind of cookie cutter-ish, not that all doctors, I'm not saying they're not all that way. But I think that's a similar thing of this will fix it.
Yes.
Well, it will.
Yeah.
It will control the behavior, whatever that medication is.
Yes.
For that, and maybe mask some of the whatever it is.
Yeah, it slaps a Band-Aid on it, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that is a lot of the problem right there, is that there's a lot of kids who are just over medicated. And my question is, and this I go through this in counseling with almost every single client that I have, is that you begin with the end in mind. So we're not going to begin something unless we can trace it out and see where our strategy takes us. Strategy is about movement. Tactics is about the individual steps that you take along the way to get where you need to go to achieve that strategy. So, my kid, is ADHD, I might need to take him to the hospital or something like that. Well, okay. Isn't it fascinating that we see a lot of kids that get diagnosed and get on ADHD medication and none of them get off? Well, why is that? Right? Like, that's problematic. If I have a headache, I take ibuprofen or I take Tylenol, and when my headache goes away, I don't continue to take it.
Right.
So again, I think that it's problematic. In psychiatry, last time I heard, I think this was in 2019, I read this, that the study was from 2019, about 8 out of every 10 current psychiatry students specialize in psychopharmacology. Well, that's the only thing they're going to make money at. And the going rate is about $250 to $300 to meet with a psychiatrist. And that meeting is 15 minutes. And so,
wow.
Yeah. So that
just pisses me off.
Yeah. They're not.
It really does.
Yeah. It does me too, because they're not taking the time to figure out what's really going on. I literally have a booklet. Now, it's from the DSM-4, okay? And the DSM is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, okay? So it's kind of like the mental health's Bible, so to speak, okay?
Okay.
There's a DSM-5 now, and now they're just recently, they have come out with the DSM-5 TR, which is TR just stands for text revision. Okay. So it's kind of like an updated version.
Sure.
Well, in the DSM-4, I have a little booklet that is on my bookshelf in my office that is a list of questions that you would ask in a screening process to see if people struggle with any kind of these mental health issues, these mental illnesses. And that's basically what they go through in psychiatry office. Do you feel this? How often do you feel this? What frequency is it? What's the intensity on a scale of 1 to 10? And then presto, boom. Yep. Here's your script. Off you go.
So then this may be veering off. We keep doing that. What do you recommend? Because the other way that's similar in someone on the parent side of it, right? As a parent, I feel like I should trust my doctor, right? I feel like I should trust my kid's teacher, or my kid's counselor, who's maybe getting the referral from the teacher. It goes, I don't know if that's the process, goes to the counselor. I don't know, but you're like, well, these are the people that I'm trusting, and this is what they say I should do. So what do you do?
And to that, I would say, people give over too much trust to people like me. If I'm just going to be very frank with you.
Yeah, I wanted to bring that, and I want you to be able to elaborate on her question. But the thing that kind of began repeating itself in my mind when you were explaining all of this was like, you worked in the public school system. And it almost sounds like that there's this narrative that's kind of being pushed through public school system. And please, because you worked in the system, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but this isn't the only issue that I've kind of got with the public school system these days. And the kind of walk that we're seeing as the progression continues year to year. How did you take the knowledge that you had, the experience that you have, and how was it received when you were, talking to administrators, school board members, whatever it might be, on how they were handling certain issues like you were speaking of earlier?
Well, basically, it varies from school district to school district, and even within that district, it varies from school to school. So you might have a district that really, the general idea or the general ethos of the district is that it's just not very good. But you might have a couple of isolated schools within that district that are great.
Okay, so did you have any issues in Grain Valley?
No, Grain Valley, by and large, was a great school district. And I was at Matthews Elementary, and I loved my time there.
Okay.
Absolutely loved it. But that was because I had a good administrator.
Okay.
Sure.
At the time.
Sure.
And then when that changes, everything else changes.
Sure. So getting them back to Jill's question then is to not put too much trust into people like you. What does a parent look for then? How does the parent stay aware or stay on top of things when you're just putting your heart and you got to have some faith. You don't want to send your kids to a school thing like, man, I got to babysit this thing and I got to be aware of what they're talking to them about, because
or just be like, you don't want, I don't know. I don't mean to put like fear in someone listening that's like, maybe they've been told something or diagnosed something and go, well, can I not trust that one? And then be skeptical of everything. But I think there's a healthy level of skepticism too, of like, well, if this is the process, but what could also be a contributing factor, because I think that's, whether you're talking about physical health or mental health, I think, and maybe, I don't know, maybe this is just not super mainstream, but there can be so many other factors. There can be environmental factors. There can be something that's diet related that can affect obviously your physical health.
Actually,
but
that's a big thing.
Mental health, so still back to the what are you supposed to do as a parent if you're getting referred to a psychiatrist and you're like, well, it's going to cost me $300 and they're going to be in there 12 minutes, but I'm just going to be like, okay, I'll do that. I'll take that prescription.
Yeah.
Give my kid that.
And to that, I would say, talking to people who are in the mental health profession, in my opinion, is kind of like trying on a pair of shoes. You might need to try a couple on before you find a good fit. And so I would, if I had a child and it was my child and they got a referral for ADHD or whatever, depression,
Sure.
And I took them to a psychiatrist and the psychiatrist really didn't spend any time with them at all, that is an automatic red flag for me as a parent. You're not getting to know my kiddo. You're not getting to know my child. It's really, really easy. And one of the things at Peace Partnership that we do is we do not bill out to insurance. We do not diagnose. And the reason for there's very specific reasons for that. The reason that we don't do that is because in order to get paid by insurance, you have to diagnose.
Makes sense.
That was and this is I'm telling all the dirty secrets of counseling. Everybody,
that's good.
Anybody who's a mental health professional is like, shut up, stop talking. The entire reason for the DSM is because of insurance. It's not for the patient. It's not for the client. Isn't that something? There is in the very back, there's what's called ICD-9 codes, and it's those codes that you submit to insurance so that you can then get paid.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that could get kind of tricky on your end.
Oh yeah. And that's why we
really
avoid
tricky.
It. Yes.
Well, no. I'm just, yes. I mean, I see what you're saying, but I'm saying you are opening up the door to have conversation with all different walks of life, all different conversation. I mean, you just don't know what's going to come through the door.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it's somebody who is, say, low income, and because of your experience that this person has this problem, whatever it might be. This person may be one of those who does need to be medicated. How do you help that person? You can't diagnose it. You can't give them a prescription because you can't diagnose it. Do you tell them that they need to go see a doctor that they can't afford now, like a medical doctor?
Yeah, well, and in those cases, we will work with just a couple of different doctors' offices or psychiatrists in town who we're like, okay, these are people in our opinion that they have done right by the people that we have sent to them. And we will tell them like, okay, yeah, this is going to be a bill for you, but I really think that this is going to be in your best interest. And so that we have a very collaborative relationship with a number of other counseling offices because Peace Partnership is relatively small. And I am a quality type of a guy. I'm not a quantity type of a guy.
Good.
I want to stay in our lane, and I don't want to go outside of our lane if it's not something that we can do with excellence. Right. I don't want to follow an example. I want to be an example. Yeah. And so we pride ourselves on the idea that you could pick our office up and you could set it in, Johnson County. You could set it in Leawood, wherever, and we'd fit right in. Okay. And we offer that level of services to the people that otherwise would never, ever be able to afford it. And there was one lady that I work with. She's from the urban core, and horrific circumstance. My specialization in my doctoral work is grief and trauma. And so I work a lot with people who have experienced some very, very dark, bad things, let's say. Okay. And she was referred to us. She was a school bus driver at a local school district. And she was referred to us because she had moved out of the urban core. Her sister, she had an identical twin sister. And her sister was still living in the urban core and had just recently become a Christian. And so she was bothering her sister, essentially kind of nagging at her to go to church with her. Okay. And so she finally said, okay, well, fine. Well, I guess her sister was dating, my client's sister was dating some big time drug dealer. And the drug dealer found out about this and was high as a kite and was driving in his car and just flew off the handle and got mad and ran his car into a telephone pole and killed both of them instantly.
Oh my gosh.
And they could not, the police or whoever could not get a hold of the mother. And so my client had to go identify the body.
Oh no.
Right. So here she is looking at her identical twin.
Right.
And it just, as you can imagine, really, really took a toll on her. And so it's working with her. She was one of our $5 a session clients. And it was just working with her. I worked with her for several months. And one of the things that she said, and we got her all, got everything, kind of straightened out, got everything put back together, all those different moving pieces, and got her out of HUD housing, got her out of the situation. She was dating some loser at the time. She ended up.
Wow. So your counseling goes above just talking to them. Like you're trying to find them a new and better path in life.
What
This
did you
is
say?
our community.
It's about finding a way.
Yes.
Right? Is that what you said earlier?
Yes. Yeah. This is our community. It makes sense for us to help these people. Like this is our backyard. I firmly believe that.
That's so cool.
Like we want to help people. And I'll talk about our school services here in just a minute. But one of the things that we did, we got her out of the urban core. She moved to Blue Springs, got her in an apartment. She's doing very well. And one of the things that she liked was she said, well, I really like music and I really like driving. That's why she was a bus driver. But she's like, bus driving just isn't paying the bills for me. I was like, okay, fine. Let's find something that will. So we're exploring all these different options. And finally, what she ended up doing is she ended up working for an auto parts place, delivering auto parts to all these different places. She's driving, she's listening to her music, and in no time she's managing other people doing that. Right? So because she found her lane.
Right.
Like this is, and it's so fascinating. Once you find your lane, you will watch yourself excel in that lane if you extend some effort to it. And so she's doing very well. We're kind of tapering services off, and I have the very stereotypical leather couch in my office, right? This is the counselor's couch.
Do the patients get to lay down on it and cross their arms on their chest and close their eyes?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I have some of them joke and they do.
That's what we need in here for the podcast. That's what I want to do. I want to lay on the couch while we record.
That's right.
Well, we got a couch over. I've got a couch for you. I just need to change the camera, add a camera or something.
Yeah.
Anyway, go ahead.
I'll sit behind, be very Freudian. I'll sit behind you and ask you questions about your mother, you know?
Yeah.
You know, well, we could probably set this up and just change the camera if you guys want to really reenact this. I can make that happen.
Yeah. And how long have these problems been plaguing you?
Yes.
You know?
Wow. This is not the first time you played that part.
Lots of clients come in and joke about that, you know.
I'm sure.
But she's sitting on my couch, and we're kind of about 2/3 of the way through one of our final sessions, and she just gets very quiet. And all of a sudden she runs her hand on the couch cushion beside her, and she's not saying anything. And she just runs her hand along this. And she looks up at me, and she has tears in her eyes. And she says, "Thank you for treating me with dignity."
Oh, wow. That's good.
Right?
Yeah.
Isn't that something?
Yeah.
And that is something that I have subscribed to for years and years and years. It's the relationship that heals.
You know, that's a really interesting point. I'm not going to say that I've never gone to counseling before. Again, that's something I don't like to admit on a podcast, but I have. And one of the fears, I guess, going into it is that you sorry, pathetic loser, you couldn't figure it out on your own. Now you've got to go to counseling, that this person's going to have to fix your life for you because you weren't strong enough or smart enough to figure it out on your own.
Yeah.
So you feel like you've lost a little bit of dignity before you even go sit in the first session, before you even call and make the appointment, you know, and the truth of the matter is that sometimes it's not necessarily this doctor-esque type of thing that you need. You just need somebody with a little bit of experience on how to navigate tough situations to sit down with you and just give you a little bit of guidance.
100%.
And by taking that approach and making somebody feel like they have some dignity, it gives them inspiration and what's the word I'm looking for? Inspiration and excitement to continue the process. Otherwise, like when you go to a first counseling session, I don't know, I can't speak for everybody else but myself, but you're dreading it.
Oh, yeah.
I dread like, gosh, I don't want to go do this.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to find out how much I suck. Find out how screwed up I am, or how in this particular area of my life I'm so screwed up. But I loved how you hit on that, because that was the feeling that I had where I lost some dignity, that I had to go do this. I had no other choice. I surrendered to counseling.
Yeah. And yes. And what I will often tell people too, is that I am not your guru. Okay. I am not the guy that is going to, impart these words of wisdom to you that is just going to change your life. Yes, I do know some things because I've been doing this for such a long time at such a high level, and I will help you, but I am a guide, and you should not view me as anything more than that.
Yeah.
That's what you should view me as. And if I would have stepped at in a different place in life, you'd be in my seat and I'd be over there. And I firmly believe that. I think that there's different types of intelligence. If I picked up the average Joe here in Kansas City and took him back to, rural Colorado on a ranch, boy, you'd feel pretty dumb.
Yeah.
Really quick.
Right.
And likewise, if you drop me off in the financial district of New York City, I'd feel pretty out of place.
Yeah.
Feel pretty dumb. So it's not about, me being smart or anything like that. It's about us finding a way. we can find a way forward. And you come alongside that person in a very, very tangible way. And you say, hey, let's work through this, and let's collectively agree that we are going to set aside any sense of shame and any sense of embarrassment. And the reason that we're going to do that is for the purposes of growth.
Yeah.
Because shame causes hiding. That's what it's caused since the fall. Shame causes hiding. And if you are hidden, we're not ever going to discover what is at the core of really bedeviling your life. So let's set that aside and let's just make observations about things, and we can judge them later. And people get judgment and condemnation confused.
Mm-hmm.
All a judgment is saying this is better than that. That's all a judgment is. Now, condemnation, conversely, says you're bad in your totality.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, yeah, let's take our foot off that gas pedal.
Yeah. How about completely off?
Yeah, but the fact of the matter is that, people are in counseling because they haven't accurately judged their own life.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so it's like, okay, well, there's no shame about that. We do the same thing. It's not like, well, John sins less than me, and so let's go talk to him,
Yeah.
Like, no, it's just that I know this one area. That's all.
Yeah.
That's all.
Is this a ministry for you? And what I mean by that is, I think anyone who's a Christian, whatever they're in is their ministry, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you can be a minister anywhere in any walk of life. But does everyone who comes and lays on your leather couch, they may be seeking counsel that involves Jesus,
Mm-hmm.
right? But they may not be.
Mm-hmm.
So does it anyway? Because I don't know. I don't know where I'm going with that. I'm just curious. Like, is it a given that this is part of our structure? This is part of what we talk about is your like actual identity.
Yeah.
Or no, is it just kind of where it goes?
No, I think I operate off of the premise that we are spiritual beings having a physical experience.
Okay.
I do not operate off of the humanistic standpoint that we are physical beings and maybe or maybe not we will have this spiritual experience at some point in the future. I just don't believe that.
Okay.
And so I operate off of that premise. And what I will say to people, and I have a lot of people, I have this weird inroad into the hipster community. I have no idea why, but I'm not a traditional counselor in the sense of the cognitive behavioral route. I'm more of a psychoanalyst. And so I practice counseling from that standpoint. I practice counseling from a very existential standpoint. Existential just simply means that there are fundamental givens of our existence that because we exist, we will struggle with certain things. Mm-hmm. Freedom, love loss, meaning in life, those types of things. Mm-hmm. And because of that, this is just an assumption that I have. I know that there are people that struggle with mental illness and with mental health issues, but I don't see them as such. Most of the time, people don't come to counseling because they struggle with mental illness issues. They come to counseling because they have life complexity issues.
Yeah.
And life has just spun out of their control. And they need help.
Jeez almighty, this sounds like my life.
They just need help putting the pieces back together.
And doesn't that sound better anyway?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
doesn't it sound
for
better?
Sure.
I mean, like, wouldn't you rather just, because you always say, oh, I hate admitting, and saying
I do.
mental
It's sick.
illness,
It just
struggling
makes me
with it.
yeah.
Like, wouldn't you rather just say, I'm just struggling with life?
Sure.
Or life complexities,
Sure.
if you want to use a big word. But otherwise, just like, life's just a lot right now.
Yeah,
whatever
because
that looks
the term
like for
mental
you.
health or mental illness just has such a negative connotation to it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I just got off track here for a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And here you also hit on something, and I've talked about that about this on this podcast several times, as the biggest thing that I learned in what I was dealing with was internalizing is destructive. You don't necessarily need to go to a counselor. You can talk to a family member. You can talk to a close friend, whoever it is that you have confidence in and you're comfortable speaking with. But I was feeling so much shame and disappointment in myself that I was afraid of what other people would think, which was weird because there was a certain, I'd reached a certain level of success because I didn't care what people thought. And then people started to recognize the success that I was having. And I remember on several occasions, and I don't want to over exaggerate it, but it was more times than I could count where people would reach out to me and say, hey, I've seen what you've been doing with this. I'd like to get your opinion. So I noticed that people were recognizing the progress that I was making in my life.
Right.
And so now if they notice the fallback,
there's been some of it falling apart or something failing, that they're going to think, oh, well, he
was a fake. He was a phony.
Right.
He's a failure, blah, blah. So then I'm like internalizing all this shame. I didn't know how to express it. And so I held that in for 2 years to where then it started to physically affect my body.
Sure.
To where I was having these weird itching attacks on a road trip. And then I had the anxiety panic attack on an airplane before it took off from Vegas, where I never had any of these issues before. And I go to my doctor and he says, you've got I'm stumbling all over the place here. I'd been internalizing all of that for so long that it was starting to physically take over my body. It was starting to physically affect my body. He did put me on an antidepressant he put me on the antidepressant. It was my choice to stay on it for however long I wanted to stay on it. But I didn't want to be dependent on medication, but it did help. It did help get me chemically balanced because what I needed was to find some clarity. Okay. How did I get here? Where am I at? Feel free from the shame, begin talking about it, and then, finding, how do I get out of this?
Yes. Yeah. And Ronnie, you mentioned something really, really fascinating that I hear a lot in people's stories. And that is the idea of where am I at? And what I tell people is that a lot of times people find themselves in very, very tough situations because they've lost their way. And the first thing that you should do if you lose your way is you should stop moving.
It's kind of like that pit. If you're in a pit, quit digging.
Quit digging, yes.
So if you don't know where you're going, stop.
Yeah, it's that old adage, that. Right? That, oh, well, I don't know where we're headed, but we're making great time. It's that idea. No, stop moving, because if you don't know where you're at, that means you don't know where you're going.
Right.
And if you don't know where you're going, that means if you go straight, if you turn left, if you turn right, up, down, whatever, you could be making a catastrophically bad decision. So let's figure out where you're at, and then we can move forward.
This sounds like something from an old book.
Yes.
I'm guessing it's an old, musty, smelly book.
Yes. So it's that type of thinking that is helpful for people, because it conceptualizes the issue in terms that they can understand. That it gives them some handles, right? Because one of the problems with shame is that it's not even really an emotion. It's something that it's a sensation. It's something that you feel in your being, so to speak. And people, there's no handles to that. They can't wrap their minds around it. They're like, what am I supposed to do with this? Yeah. And so by saying it that way, it breaks it down into manageable pieces. Okay, let's stop. Let's figure out where you're at in life. Let's figure out what's going on. Let's figure out these contributing factors, and then we can move forward. As an example, so on my Genesis counseling side of things, I worked with a guy who's very, very successful. His wife had come in, and his wife had come to him and had, out of the blue, said, I want a divorce. Okay. And this completely just took him by surprise. Okay. Lives over in Johnson County, drives downtown every day to go to work. And I had gone through a couple of sessions, and I just couldn't make sense of it, right? He was lost, and subsequently I was lost as well.
Yeah.
And so when I was trained that whenever that happens, again, sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander, okay? I need to stop moving, and I need to figure out where I'm at with this client, with this person. I need to figure this out. So what I asked him is, I said, give me a detailed breakdown of your week. Okay. So, I work downtown, so I get up pretty early in the morning. How early is early? Well, I'm a runner, and so I get up at 4, and I try and put in about 40 miles a week. Okay. So I run for, hour hour and a half, take a shower, have breakfast, and then I go into work, and I want to miss the traffic. So I go in about 7. Okay. And then you're there all day. Yep, there all day. Now I usually stay a little late because I want to miss traffic. So I, come home about 6. Okay. Anything else you got going on? Yeah, I'm the president of my HOA. Okay. How many houses are in your HOA? About 250. Okay. And anything else? Yep. I've got 2 kids, and I am my daughter's soccer coach. Okay. And I said, well, I've got good news for you. Well, what's that? I know why your wife filed for divorce.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Why? Well, you don't have time for her.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And he just literally, he sank down into my couch and said, I have never thought of that. Right? So it's just a different perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But if you don't know where you're at, it seems obvious to everyone, but you have to stop long enough to figure that out.
Yeah, and his perception is, man, I'm busting my ass. I'm getting up early.
Yeah.
I'm doing the things I got to do to be mentally healthy. I'm working out. I'm going to work early. I'm working late. I'm trying to be a good dad. I'm involved with my kids. Why wouldn't any wife or woman want to honor that or recognize that or appreciate that?
Yep.
And a woman's built differently.
Yes.
And she wants...
Men are built to handle their business. Men like to win. People oftentimes think like, well, with this issue of divorce, like, well, what keeps men in marriages? And most women, if you ask them that, they will jokingly say sex, right? And I say, I'm not trying to be crude, but no, for $50, a guy can go find that.
Yeah.
Okay. It's not sex that keeps men in marriage. It's the ability to make their woman happy.
Yeah.
That's what keeps men in marriages. Ladies, if he can't win with you, oh, be careful. Be careful, right? Now, conversely, on the other side of that, well, what keeps women in marriages? Feeling cherished.
Mm-hmm.
Men, does she feel like you worship the ground she walks on? Because if she doesn't feel unique, if she doesn't feel special, oh boy, be careful.
Yeah.
Because she's going to find somebody who will. And so it's things like that when people, they realize that's when real change starts to happen. And change happens when you move something from the want column in your mind to the need column. That people say oftentimes they're well-meaning but misguided, like, well, change takes a long time. No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
Actually, change happened just instantaneously. Absolutely instantaneously. But you shift it in your mind. It's not like, well, I really want to change. No, I've got to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And that's usually they'll say something like that. Like, I cannot do this anymore. This is over, right? They'll say something like that.
Yeah.
No.
The thing about that, what you just said, excuse me, is that it has to be fluid too. Like the person who wants to, you talked about the man's need being that the woman, how'd you say it?
To make the ability to make their woman happy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. So if he's not getting that, then she's not feeling cherished. And if she's not feeling cherished, then, it's one without,
A vicious cycle.
It's a vicious cycle. Exactly. And so it's hard and I'm saying this mostly to be proactive or inspirational, I guess, is just it's hard for someone when they don't feel like that they're getting what they need.
Yes.
To continue doing what they need to do.
Yes.
Like I'm not getting what, if a man's feeling like I'm not doing what I need to do to make her happy and I'm not getting sex. And so how do I cherish her?
Mm-hmm.
I'm having a hard time going out and cherishing this person who isn't giving me what I need.
Mm-hmm.
But what do you say to that person who's having that feeling to challenge them to continue cherishing them beyond what they're missing out on?
Okay. So in situations like that, what I try and do is I'll do something. I affectionately refer to it as a mind virus.
A mind virus.
I will implant a little mind virus. And here's how you do that. Would you say that you're more mature than your spouse? Well, yeah. Right? And then I say, well, then be more mature. You cannot give
That
you
doesn't sound like a virus. That sounds like
I tell people all the time that I am not a make you feel good counselor. I'm a prepare you for anything type counselor.
Okay.
And then you cannot give like for like and also in the same sentence say, I'm better than her. I'm better than him.
Mm-hmm.
No, you're not. You're doing the exact same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, and to guys, I say, well, you know, do you know why your wife is testing you? Do you know why she's doing that? Well, no, why? Because she's a woman. Because that's what women do. Because women like to be pursued.
Yeah.
So pursue her and pursue her until she finally says, okay, you got me.
Yeah.
Like that's what you did to catch her in the first place.
Right.
So I've been accused before, maybe just once or many times, of talking to my husband like he's one of the kids. Right. And I don't mean to. I really don't mean to. And he doesn't do it like, he usually doesn't do it in the heat of the moment. You know, he doesn't.
So what
do
does
like
that sound
Stop
like?
talking to me like a.
Like, give me an example.
Well, I have learned with one thing not to group him with the kids, not to be like everybody needs to pick up their stuff. You know, like and equalize. It's fine if I say,
because then he feels belittled.
I guess, yeah. I mean, which it makes sense. Like, I don't want him to talk to me. I'm not.
Like he's your authority figure.
Yeah, and I'm not equal with the kids either. So if I'm just telling everybody to pick their stuff up, and maybe sock balls is a thing in our house. Like, I don't want sock balls. I don't want to jam my hand into your dirty sock to unball it to wash it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm not washing sock balls, right? But if I say that to him in the same way that I might say it to the kids, it's not respectful. Now I can go to him and say, listen, you're usually pretty good about not leaving sock balls, but lately I know you're tired and you just want to get the socks off your feet, and it's the fastest way to whatever. I don't know.
Yeah.
My socks are never in balls. I don't know why the sock balls. It's just a thing. It's a thing. But I can't like do it in the heat of the moment. I can't go pick up the laundry and then yell at him because sock balls again. You know, like I have done it. But he's usually really good about not approach it, whatever it is, in the heat of the moment. It might be later. So then he's taught me to do that with him too, and just say, listen, I know you're tired and you just want to get your dirty socks off your feet and take a shower and just relax because you've worked all day, right? But then when I go to get the laundry and there's sock balls, when I've asked you to not have sock balls, it feels directed at me, even though it's absolutely, I know it's not, but I take it personally. Yeah. Because my job in the home is to do the laundry and but I don't want sock balls. I'm good to do the laundry, but I just don't want sock balls, you know? And so if I just every time jammed my hand in the sock and took care of it and never said anything, I'm defeating my own self by not dealing with it and not communicating. Is how we've figured out ourselves that, like, for me to shut down and just never say anything about it, that's not going to work because it's not going to annoy me less. Yeah,
correct.
I was barring a miracle.
Yeah.
You know, barring God saying, you know what, sock balls aren't going to bother you anymore because they're going to bother me. But in the same way, he's going to have issues with how I'm, you know, he might say, hey, listen, lately you're talking to me like I'm one of the kids. Yeah. And I don't appreciate that, you know, like, so we've just learned that those kinds of communication can't happen when we're feeling the heat and heavy of it. Yes. You know what I mean? Yep. That then we have to have a conversation and go, listen, this is not working.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, excuse me. I tell people that with regards to marriage communication, a good rule to remember is you need to strike when the iron is cold.
For sure.
Yeah. Don't deal with things.
For sure.
The time to deal with some complex marriage issue is not in the heat of the marriage issue. Like, find a good time. And usually you need, and this is a kind of an existential thing. You need to push away all the everyday issues of your life so that you can adequately deal with these things. That's one of the reasons why counseling is so effective at, you know, Carl Jung coined this term, that self-actualization, you know, that you really grow and you mature, is that it does that. It pushes all the everyday concerns, the soccer practices or softball practices and all of those things. It pushes those outside of the counseling office, and we're just talking about one thing.
Yeah.
And in our busy, busy world, we don't do that often. And so that's a big thing for married couples to remember is don't deal with it in the heat of the moment. Feelings are going to get hurt. You're going to violate some major marriage communication issues.
Sure.
And when that happens, you're going to build contempt. You're going to build criticism. The other person's going to stonewall you. They're going to get defensive, and it just builds from there.
Right.
Okay, so we're going to take a break here in just a bit, but I wanted to give you the opportunity because I set it up as an example of a guy who's coming to you, who's married, and he's having a hard time cherishing his wife because he isn't getting what he needs. And then you use the little mind game to basically say, who's the more mature person in the relationship, then act like it. Let's go from the role of a woman who's not getting what she needs, and she's having a hard time making him feel valuable and giving, intercourse or whatever it might be. What do you say to the wife?
To the wife, I would say that, well, a lot of times there is some, there's some extenuating circumstances. And so I would have to
It's always different for the woman. I mean, I'm so sick of this crap. Why do you counselors do that? I'm kidding.
So wait, so you're saying life complexities are a little more complex for women?
There's, and the reason that I believe, and I'm not trying to speak out of both sides. I know Ronnie's like, I'm not having this man. Like, this is the last time I'm having this guy.
They
on.
always
Forget
get a free pass in some way, shape, or form, and it's just so black and white for the guys.
They're so extra.
Wait,
we're so extra.
Yes. Yeah. Anyway, I'm joking, obviously. Go ahead.
I believe that it is a more complex, nuanced situation for women because I believe that women contemplate their mortality at a younger age. Women are, from a very early age, they are playing with dolls. They're being a mother.
Yeah.
They're playing house. They're playing doctor, taking care of people. They're planning their wedding, right? I mean, how many women do other women know that they plan their wedding from the time they're a little girl? Right? I mean, that's very, very common.
Sure.
So guys don't do that.
No.
Right? Like, no. Yeah. Like when we're 10 or 12 or 15, like
we're trying to figure out how to make the NFL.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I'm thinking about, right. I'm thinking about like catching frogs and crawdads. You know, I'm not thinking about the existential meaning of marriage,
Exactly.
And so and I think that they come across that naturally because I believe that women were created for the expressed purpose of relationship. If you think about it, if you go clear back to Genesis chapter 2, Adam had just been created, and he had just named all of the animals in the garden. Now, that in and of itself is a fascinating study because, I mean, how smart would you have to be to go like, oh, that's an aardvark, that's a turkey, that's an elephant?
Yeah.
Okay. And where did he get the word? I mean, God had to give him those words, right? Because
you'd think, yeah.
I don't know.
So right after that, and this is not expressly stated in the text. I'm just reading some psychological significance into the text, okay? But right after that, God says, it is not good for man to be alone.
That is in the text.
That is in the text.
That part is in the, yes.
That part is there, yes. And it's right after that Eve is made. And I think, where I'm taking liberty here, is I think that as Adam is naming all of these animals, psychologically, he's saying, you're not like me, you're not like me, you're not like me. And he may be the only person to have ever lived to really, truly understand what it means to be in complete isolation. He was alone.
Wow.
And I think that that's when God says, this is not good. This is bad.
This dude needs somebody.
This dude needs somebody. And women.
Sure.
Right. We get women for that. And so I think that it is a more nuanced thing. And for sex, or rather for women, sex is a much more intimate thing. And so men tend to trivialize sex to a certain degree. It's much more about the physical act of it. And for women, that's just not the case. That's not been my experience from the women that I've talked to. And so they have to feel connected emotionally, in order for that to be a part of the relationship. And so in that type of a situation, we might build to that. Like if there's an affair that has happened and both, parties have agreed that we're going to work on the marriage and get things, put back together, we can build to that. But for the guy, I would say like, hey, that part of your relationship has been wrecked. And we need to put these pieces back together again so that she feels connected with you. And when she feels connected with you, the sex will come.
Mm-hmm.
But it's important that you not put the cart before the horse, because otherwise what the woman can feel like is the woman just feels cheap and used. And then that violates my, kind of my tenet rule of like, well, does she feel unique and cherished?
Mm-hmm.
Well, no.
Mm-hmm.
So.
I
see you thinking over there.
So
my gosh, I'm just
so many things.
Yeah, you talked about. I don't want to cause controversy or be argumentative, but you use the term that guys, and you're the doctor, right? I'm certainly not, but you said that men typically find sex to be trivial.
They can,
right? Yeah. And I can see that, and I can see where I've even treated it like that at points in time in my life. But I think that there's also this thing that guys have, based on conversations that I have with other guys who are married, is it's not necessarily just wham, bam, thank you, ma'am, and then feeling gratified or good, because guys don't like that.
Mm-hmm.
Guys don't want to just get off and be done. They want to feel like they're wanted from their wife. And when their wife feels like they have to do it just because, oh my God, he's not going to leave me alone if I don't do it. And that sucks too.
Yes.
So yes. I want to kind of defend the guy a little bit, or most guys, or those who, because I don't want it to feel like most men, or in this conversation, men are taking it like, maybe I'm not that guy who treats it as trivial. Yes, I physically expressive and physically enjoy that act, but this is what I really get from it, is when my wife is into it and she wants me and she's looking at me with the desire that I'm the man, that's when the sex is enjoyable for the guy.
Mm-hmm.
And when they don't have that, then it's just.
Yes. And Ronnie, I would agree with you. And I would add to that, it's the immature individual that just wants to kind of go through the motions, so to speak. That's the individual that is trivializing sex. And it's almost in the sense of like, well, even though we do have this big problem in our marriage, you owe me sex, and that's just part of the deal.
Okay.
It's that type of it where it's like, buddy, you're not getting it.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're just not understanding what's going on here. We've got bigger fish to fry, and we need to get after that.
Sure. Fair enough. Okay. So we're going to take a break. We guys, covered a lot there. And look, we are almost into this thing, 2 hours. So we're going to get close to wrapping it up, because I don't want to keep Dr. John Thompson here longer than he can be. Definitely want to get into how we can help Peace Partnership with the Heartland Premier Charity Golf Classic as well. And I wanted to get a little bit more clarity about your childhood and the relationship that you have with your parents. We'll try to do that next when we return in episode 34 of the Papa Ron Podcast.
The Papa Ron Podcast is brought to you by the award-winning Heartland Waterfowl, airing each week on Sportsman's Channel. Check out heartlandwaterfowl.com for airtimes, and be sure to browse their online store. Also, subscribe to the Heartland Waterfowl YouTube channel and watch their new original series, including their podcast, Behind the Blind. Check it out, and don't doubt the scout. Now, back to the Papa Ron Podcast. Here's Ronnie Phillips and Jillian Gregg.
All right, the Papa Ron Podcast also brought to you by Clean AF. Clean Polish Protect, specifically formulated to protect and beautify surfaces, including plastic, vinyl, rubber, and carbon fiber. Water-resistant formulation is safe to use on gloss or matte finishes and makes the cleanup process easier by forming a durable coating that repels mud, dirt, and debris. Apply lightly, buff to a dry sheen. Perfect for all power sports enthusiasts. Purchase online at cleanabsolutelyflawless.com or check them out at Dell's Power Sports in Grain Valley, Missouri. All right, so I wanted to go back real quick to your childhood, because I'm just fascinated with that, because at some point in time, you got kicked out of the house. And so we never really got to that point on what you did, how bad it was that your parents, and then at some point you come to Kansas City and you go through this process of, I guess, finding yourself and becoming a Christian or being saved by Christ, and then going back and then of course taking in all the information that you get by going through the schooling of being a psychologist, right? At some point you had to have closure with your family, right? Right? Like maybe she needed to forgive you and you needed to forgive her. But before we get to the forgiveness, what was it that was the tipping point to where you were booted from the house and you needed to find a place to live?
So my behaviors during my high school years just gradually continued to escalate, and they became borderline kind of criminal in nature.
Criminal.
Yeah. So we were doing things, vandalism, egging houses. I was in lots of fights, that type.
Were you a violent person? Was violence part of the problem that you had?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think to a large extent, it was violence for me was just part of that misplaced aggressive nature. That I had all of this energy, and I've always felt like that I just have all of this energy, and I just didn't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
And then, it's like I said,
didn't play
earlier,
football, didn't do wrestling or anything in sports that would help you with that?
Oh yeah. But it was just different people have different capacities, and I've always just been a high capacity type of individual. I ran track. I played soccer. I did jujitsu.
Wow.
Did a lot of that. And it was just one of those things that I was going to live the life that I wanted to live.
Yeah.
And it gradually just escalated to a point where I was drinking all the time. I was partying all the time. I was just not living a good life. And of course I was at odds with mom and dad, because mom and dad are saying like, look, this is our house, and you don't pay the bills here. We pay the bills. So something's going to have to give. And so it was one of those situations where it's like, okay, well, I'm out.
Yeah.
So that was your your call,
choice,
or it was like that's where it was going. Like, was there an ultimatum, or was there a?
That's where it was going.
Yeah. So you made the call because you're in charge.
It was like, okay, like, all right, that's that's it.
Yeah.
So I have two questions. And again, I got to ask it before I forget it. So did you resent your parents through that entire childhood, teen? Like, was there any, how do I ask this? Did you have any affection for them? Like, you might've been angry with them. They're trying to provide structure. You didn't want the structure. Did you hate your parents, or did you ever, like, sometimes I love them, sometimes I don't? And I guess ultimately where I'm going with this is the second part of this question is, what could they have done differently with you? Like what word they were doing the best with what they knew. Mm-hmm. If there is a person who's listening to this, who has a high intensity child who doesn't handle structure and is just kind of to do it themselves, very independent, what can they do differently so that they don't have to go through what you and your parents went through?
Okay. Well, what you can do is if you have a kiddo like that, excuse me, if you feel that is your kiddo, find people who have got your kid's number. I was very, very blessed and lucky that all along the way, I had a number of people. Mr. Watson was a history teacher that I had he just had me figured out. Coach McDonald, my weightlifting coach, I was into bodybuilding too when I was in high school. He had me figured out. He just knew, and I don't know, he figured the JON riddle out. He just figured me out. And
so you had a way of respecting them and honoring them better than you did your parents. And so you were more receptive to listening to their discipline or their structure than your parents.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
What did they do different?
Honestly, I would love to know. I really don't know. And I have given that some serious thought, but they just had me figured out to a young age. And what I think, again, I believe life is, like I said, life is about finding a way. And I believe that God gave us 6 basic human needs. Tony Robbins talks about this. He's a kind of a motivational speaker and stuff. Brilliant guy.
Yeah.
And I've done a lot of his continuing education and training. I think he's a once in a generation genius, and he does a lot of work with these 6 basic needs. And so I do that as well.
Okay.
And the 6 basic needs are criticism. I'm sorry. Okay. Now, of course
now you're on the spot.
Right.
Yeah. Now that I'm on the spot.
Yeah, I know.
You want me to Google it? You know them?
I don't know.
Google
No,
them. Let's see. I can't, usually I can remember them right off the top of my head.
Well, I'll Google it, and then
So there's love and acceptance, significance, growth, contribution, certainty, and uncertainty. That's it.
Okay. So you got it.
Yes.
Okay.
So those are the 6 basic needs. And I think that we all have those 6 needs, but we don't all value them equally.
Okay.
And for me, growing up in high school, I wanted to be immensely significant, and that men will die for significance. Women will die for love.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I really wanted to be someone of significance. And I think that Mr. Watson and Coach McDonald, Coach Mack, I think that they were able to tune into that and realize that that was just kind of a part of my makeup and focus on that. I set the squat rep test in high school, like all kinds, and it was as many squats as you could do with the bar in 90 minutes, and I did just over about 7,000.
Gee.
And so you just go and go and go and go and go.
Oh my gosh.
And
that seems like something that just that in particular, that particular need, significance, would be something that that a coach of any kind would probably be really in tune to.
Yes.
Just because if they're the go-getter and they always want to win and they always want to beat their own record and they always want to, their personal best is always climbing and climbing. I would think that would be something.
Well, and at that level too, coaches are teachers, right? And so they, it's not like just a professional or somebody who solely gets paid on being a coach. They are teachers. And so I think what I'm hearing, and you correct me if I'm wrong, is that they were able to identify that you excelled and they would earn your respect if they were able to praise you with the things that you good instead of always hearing how you're screwing up or doing things wrong. Right. And so maybe, and again, I'm putting words in your mouth, but maybe did your parents ever show pride in you? Were you just that kid that was just getting into so much trouble that you felt like all you were was just in trouble all the time? And that's why you looked and sought out your coach and those people that your teachers, because you did get the gratification and the feeling of self-worth from time to time.
Yeah. And I think that was a large part of it. I think that, Coach McDonald would give me tasks that were just, okay, John, we got the squat rep test or we got the curl rep test or whatever. And like, we're going to see what you can do.
Yeah.
And I always answered that. And early on, before I became a Christian, I was actually slated to go the special forces route. And that's what I wanted to do. I was in one of the things I did, I was in shooting sports early on, and I was the top shot in Mesa County for 6 years in a row. I competed at the state level and, that kind of thing. And I've always loved that. I love the precision about it. And
so you weren't a complete, screw up.
No.
I mean, when you first started this conversation, it just made it sound like that you were out of control and a complete screw up, but like you were a lot of things that you did excel at.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And I kind of kept that. I was very compartmentalized.
Okay.
And I kept that part of my life that was just chaos and madness and parties and fights and all that other stuff. I kept that very, very compartmentalized because I didn't want it to bleed over into some of and every once in a while it did. Like my senior year, I got kicked off the track team and I was, set. And in my junior year, I'd already set a couple of, set a state record, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so, and I, got kicked off because it just got to be too much.
Okay.
You can't balance those worlds. And that's a lot of what I work with people on is there seems to be, as you progress in life, there seems to be a gradual divide that takes place. And when you're young, you have the energy to live in two worlds. You can hop back and forth between two worlds. But as you progress in life, as you get older, but also as those two worlds build in intensity, so to speak, it becomes increasingly difficult to live in both worlds. And you just can't do that. And I think that that's the case because it follows a biblical maxim. A man cannot serve two masters. And so I think that was the case for me, where I tried to keep these two worlds kind of compartmentalized. And in a in a terrible way. I did a relatively good job about it, but it bled over into other areas of my life. And eventually you just get to the point where, okay, well, one of these is going to win and one of these is going to lose. This is a win-lose situation. That's just how it is.
So part of that question that I had for you was, did you ever have affection for your parents? I mean, did it hurt when you left? I mean, or were you just pissed off? And when you were gone, did you regret? Like, I'm trying to understand your emotion. You spoke so affectionately of your dad, you know, when we were talking about going on that elk trip.
Yeah.
And granted, this is many years later, right? You know, and so there's been a lot, but I'm wanting to understand the relationship beyond the surface with your parents. You know, if you had any affection, if there was any tormenting that was going on, like you were hurting and you were depressed and you were like, why don't they just accept me for who I am? Or why don't they love me like other parents love kids? Like what was the anguish that you were feeling inside? And at what point, and again, I'm doing a new two-parter question for you, but at some point there had to have been reconciliation and forgiveness on both sides. So speak to the emotion, the anguish. Maybe there had to have been some anguish. You're not conducting yourself the way you're doing if you're not rebelling. I mean, because that's all this was rebelling.
Yeah, absolutely. At the time that I got kicked out, I was just angry. I was just furiously angry. And in kind of this, again, in kind of this like strange juxtaposition, I suppose you might say, I think that I knew deep down that mom and dad were living a better life. And I was just angry at kind of the structure of reality, so to speak.
Okay.
That I couldn't, like, why can't I live this way and have a good life?
Gotcha.
Right?
Makes sense.
It's that idea.
Okay.
And what I tell people, I don't want to get too far off track here, but I try and link that to something that prominent psychologist, Dr. Jordan Peterson, talks about.
Jordan Peterson, that guy.
Oh, he's the man.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And he's the guy we're talking about the guy from Canada, right?
Yep.
And he was on Joe Rogan recently. I'm sorry. I just love that guy.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah. I listened to a lot of his stuff. I've listened to hours and hours of his podcasts and interviews. I've taken continuing education from him. I mean, I think that he is probably the foremost Western thinker alive today.
Okay.
Genius man.
I agree.
And he talks about the psychological significance of the story of Cain and Abel.
Okay.
And one of the things that he talks about is he says that the story of Cain and Abel is not necessarily about one brother killing another. The story of Cain and Abel is about sacrifice. And if you don't see or you don't notice that your life is going well, it's highly likely that you are not sacrificing the things that you ought to sacrifice in life. And if that's the case, you really need to figure out what you need to sacrifice.
And so as that applies to you.
And as that applies to me, that was my problem. I wanted the fundamental structure of reality to bend its knee to my will.
Gotcha.
And it just wasn't.
Yeah.
And it made me mad. Right. And then, well, what happens? Well, when people are mad, anger is an emotion primarily rooted in those 6 basic needs. It's rooted in certainty. Because when people are angry, they say certain, very, very certain concrete statements. This is not going to happen. Right. They say things like that. You can hear it in their voice. And when people are angry, it gets them moving, which can be detrimental, like it was in my case.
Yeah.
It can also be helpful, like it is in the case of someone who's depressed. Being angry is measurably better for a depressed person than being depressed because, like I said, anger gets you moving, and that's exactly what they need to do. Well, I did not need to do that.
Okay.
My problem was not depression.
Right.
I was the opposite of depression.
Right.
So my problem was that I needed to figure out, okay, what's going on with you? And it wasn't necessarily that I was angry at mom and dad specifically. They were the point men for what I was angry at. I was angry that I couldn't live my life the way I wanted to live. And you're just in the way. Right? You represent that. And that's what was a constant frustration, is my mom and dad constantly saying to me, John, this isn't a good decision.
Did you love your parents through all of that?
At the time, sadly, no, I did not. I just hated them. I just was like, I don't care. I mean, I remember saying just stupid, reckless things to friends about, if they died, I'm not going to their funeral. And, like all just very, very stupid, careless things.
Yeah.
And thank God that didn't happen.
Are you the only child?
No, I have a younger sister.
Okay.
And she
what's the age difference?
3 years.
Okay. So she was able to witness, I mean, if she's only 3 years younger and you're 18 years old when you're getting kicked out, she's old enough to understand what's going on here.
Oh, yeah.
Did you have a decent relationship with her at that time in your life?
At that time, we did. It's kind of, because there were some things that were going on in the house that shouldn't have been going on in terms of just physical abuse things and stuff like that. And so nothing unites people like a common trauma,
Okay.
And they call that a trauma bond. And so my sister and I at the time were very close. And now we're not close at all. My sister is the absolute opposite of me. She is a very, very liberal, very godless person.
Wow.
Lives in Portland, Oregon. I mean, she's working for, used to. I don't think she does anymore because Elon Musk took it over. You worked for Twitter. I mean, she was the poster child for not even liberal, but that woke,
sure,
type of person. And it just, again, it's that gradual chasm that I talked about that. There just came a point in time in our past where we just grew so far apart that we were just essentially living in two separate worlds, and there was no overlap anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's no
bond.
Yeah, there's no bond. There's no point of connection there.
So is she close with your parents?
No,
not at all.
No. Now I say they because my sister has a daughter. They'll go visit. Mm-hmm. Every once in a while, things like that. But it was very, very strained relationship.
Do you? I don't even know if I can ask it because it's a personal question about your family.
Yeah, go ahead.
Do you think it's because you dealt with things the right way, in a healthy way, and she didn't? Like, is she, it doesn't sound like you hold resentment towards your parents.
No, not at all.
And it doesn't even sound like you regret leaving. Like, you getting angry made you move, and the move was moving out, and then you found the Lord and Calvary Bible College, and that, set you on the path. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't sound like you have resentment and regret and, well, if they hadn't done this and they did this and back when I was 16, this happened, and that you're kind of doing that whole blame game, pity party. Mm-hmm. Oh, I'm this old now and it's all because my parents did this or said this or treated me this way or whatever. So does she aspire more to that side, or what do you attribute that to? What do you think?
There was a series of events that happened in my sister's life that really put her on a very, very dark path. And this is, again, if she was here, she would probably argue this and say, you don't know what you're talking about because my sister's argumentative.
Okay.
I can relate to that.
It's like, okay, fair enough. Okay.
Which sister are we talking about, Jillian?
Aaron.
Okay. Aaron, you've been called.
Yeah.
Anyway,
but in my opinion, my sister is very, very intelligent. One of the smartest women I know.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Okay.
She went to work at Intel when she was in her mid-20s, worked her way up and was, this is a long time ago. Don't quote me on this, but it was something like the director of future technologies at Intel or something like that. I mean, she knew about waterproof, foldable keyboards and stuff way before.
Wow.
Right.
Okay.
So that's what she did. Then she worked for Nike, did that for a while, shot through the ranks, and she was over like all of sales of South America. I mean,
wow.
That's just her. And then she was at all of sales for Europe. I mean, just crazy stuff.
Very successful is ultimately where you're going with this.
Very successful, very bright individual. But I think, and that's a problem, okay? Because smart people are used to figuring things out. Mm-hmm. And when they can't figure things out, it's like a splinter in their mind, and they just cannot stop fiddling with it. And I think that was ultimately one of the problems that Karen ran across.
Okay.
Is that she could not figure out her miscarriage. She had a miscarriage early on.
I was wondering where you're going with that.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Lost a baby at the time, and it was kind of this perfect storm of events because things were not going well with her ex-husband, the guy that she was married to at the time.
Yeah.
And she went to the church for help, and the church ate her alive. And that just absolutely torpedoed her.
What do you mean by ate her alive?
She wanted help, and they basically sided with her husband at the time.
Okay.
And there was no, let's talk about this. There's two sides of the story. There was none of that.
So I want to be careful about that because, I mean, some could potentially, who already have issues with trying to understand if they want to be a believer, is that, well, the church shouldn't be taking sides for anybody, right? Like, so it sounds, does that make sense? I want to be careful. I guess what I'm ultimately saying is it sounds more like she went in there expecting the church to take her side, and they weren't as receptive to taking her side as she may have wanted.
Well, churches. One of the things, so we'll back up here just a little bit. So one of the things in churches that is in the research literature that pastors have talked about is when they're polled is that they feel a little bit like there has been a little bit of a bait and switch in their seminary educations because they are really schooled and educated on sermon prep and exegesis and hermeneutics, Bible interpretation, all these things. But then when they get out into the field, into their actual profession, they do a lot of counseling, and they'll take maybe like 1 or 2 classes on counseling. Okay. And so there's a lot of pastors out there that say, hey, you kind of need to address that at the seminary level. Yeah. And it's not being addressed. And what is required of pastors is different than what they're being schooled for. And so there are pastors out there who they mean well, but they will say careless things.
Gotcha. Okay.
Right.
Okay. That brings a lot of clarity to what I'm trying to understand.
And people will say that, a lot of people will say like, well, I don't want to go to church because there's hypocrites there. Well, then don't go to the grocery store either.
Right. And we talk about that all the time. We're all hypocrites and we're all going to be hypocritic again at some point in time. So I guess to put a 30 or a little overview to what really happened then was your sister went in with the wrong expectations, and maybe the church didn't handle it as well as they could have. Yeah. So it was probably, and anyway, so she had a bad experience, and then she said, and she's scarred from it and has never given it another chance. That's what I'm hearing.
No. Now she gradually, it's this gradual decline or decay that took place over several years. It didn't just happen all at once, but she gradually started going down, visiting more atheist forums, that sort of thing. You can argue till you're blue in the face with people online, and of course the other person's always right. And so that was again, this is another thing. I can't make sense of this because I can't make sense of this. Therefore, there must be some merit to it. Yeah. Those types of things. And it just gradually kind of spun out of control.
Well, I guess I'll just say this. I'm sorry to hear that. And because that sucks. And I think that as Christians, we got to hear stories like that and realize that that's not just some crazy liberal woke person. That's somebody who needs Jesus. That's somebody who needs prayer. Yeah. That's somebody who needs us more than ever. And whether they want the help or not, there's nothing stronger than prayer. And so we'll be praying for your sister on that.
Good.
Because
Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's the mindset we as Christians need to take as opposed to just the girl went crazy.
You bet.
So how were you able to, we're going to get into, last question about your family. And then I want to get into Peace Partnership and how we can help. How were you able to eventually reconcile with your parents? You mentioned the abuse thing. Was that the abuse from them? The physical abuse? Okay. Yeah. So at some point there has to be some forgiving. What did that look like?
So that just really was kind of a gradual process of growing a relationship with them. And they're out in Colorado, and I Naomi and I enjoy going out to Colorado.
Sure.
I'm an outdoor guy. Yeah. And so every single time we go to Colorado, it was gradually kind of touching base with mom and dad, doing day trips with them. Hey, let's grab lunch. Let's do these things. Texting back and forth now, those types of things. And just grow in being very intentional about growing that relationship. And like I said earlier, it's one of the things. It's like, well, if you say that you're more mature than
Act
someone,
like it.
Then you have to be more mature, and you have to reach out. Like, well, why doesn't mom or dad text me? Who cares?
Yeah,
text them.
Yeah,
do you want to be able to look at yourself in the mirror and say to yourself, okay, I made my life 1% better today. Do you want to be able to do that? Yeah. Then text them.
Yeah. Or on an extra note of that, if they don't like texting particularly and it,
right,
call them.
Call them. What's
Write a letter and put it in the mail because they probably love that. If they're 70 something, they probably like getting mail.
Maybe.
You bet.
At what point was it through your maturity or through the growth in your walk with the Lord that you then realized that you intentionally wanted to have a relationship with your parents, regardless of any, past things that were ugly that took place? I mean, that had to have been confusing.
It was. And one of the things that, and this is where, I got to give a lot of credit to Jordan Peterson. He really, really helped me out with a lot of that. And I know a lot of men echo that sentiment. But how do you know where you're going if you don't have an example? How do you know what you should do and what you should be if you don't have an ideal?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, did mom and dad do everything perfect? No, of course not. But did they do the best they could with the information that they had at the time? Yeah, I firmly believe that they did. And so why am I harboring that? And if this is my mom and dad, I mean, I'm, their genetic material essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And I need that example in my life.
Yeah.
I need to know what they know. That's a counseling maxim of mine. I always start off that way. I start off with the idea that the other person that I'm visiting with has something that they know that I don't know that I need to know. Right. And it's a collegial type of an atmosphere that we're going to affect change in, not this top down type of a thing. So that's what I wanted with mom and dad.
What was it you said that the the counselor at Calvary said to you when you were complaining about your mom, and he stopped you and said, I got a question. What was the question about your past?
Yes. He said, when are you ever going to give up on the possibility of a better past? Yeah.
Right. And that's exactly that. You can't,
Yep.
you could, whether you harp on your parents or not, or mull it around in your mind, you're not going to change it.
No.
There's no changing it.
Yeah, no, not at all. And you just, what it will feel like for the listeners out there, what it will feel like is man alive. Like you're just telling me to give up, John?
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Let go or be dragged.
Yeah.
Okay. Like those are your options. Yeah. People think that because problems are immensely complex, people tend to think that the solutions to those problems are equally complex. That's not true. That's not true. If I come to see someone for counseling, and let's say I'm, beating my wife or something, I'm an abusive husband. Well, we can get into all of the complexities as to why I'm that way and how that developed and all of those different nuances. We can get into that. But at the end of the day, don't you think I just need to stop beating my wife?
Right.
I mean, really?
Right.
That's where it's at.
That's the solution.
So,
or at least the first step.
Yes. So that's, it follows that same idea that like, okay, well, you're going to have to give up on that, John. And it feels like that. Okay, fine, give up on it. But you're not just giving up. You're also getting something in return.
Yeah.
And that's the love and the affection of the relationship.
Wow.
And so when people understand that, like, oh, well, I'm getting the short end of the stick. Are you? I don't know.
Or are you just hanging on to that little stub of a stick?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Good point.
Probably are. So how long did it take then when you know, because you said as a teenager and after you got kicked out, you were mad, you were angry, and you did not love your parents. At some point, you're going through this process of, you know, learning the word and being saved. Do you remember how long it took from when you were kicked out to feeling that affection of love for either of your parents?
That was probably into my mid to late 20s.
Okay, so 5, 6, or 6, 7 years?
Yeah, I'd probably say 7 or 8.
Okay.
Probably 7 or 8 years. And that was the idea that when you think of someone and you think of something bad that they did, the question comes to mind, do I forgive them for this? And if I do, how often do I need to forgive them for this? And my answer to that is, if you're going to forgive them, which as Christians, obviously we would say that we should,
Right.
If you're going to forgive them, well, how often do I need to forgive them? Every single time you think about it. That's how often. And that needs to be a process, and it needs to be ingrained in your mind, because prior to my specialization of grief and trauma, I specialized in neuropsychology. And it became increasingly clear that I was going to be working in some lab somewhere in a university, and I didn't want that. I like working with people. So I dropped it. But I really think that that's a fascinating field. And what you're doing when you think that way about forgiveness, like, okay, I need to forgive this person. I need to give this back to God. What you're doing is you are forming different neural pathways in your brain. You're literally connecting different synapses. That's what you're doing. The reason that, you know, mad people get mad and sad people get sad and, you know, those types of things is because it's a pattern of behavior. And emotions don't happen to us so much as we go to them.
Okay.
That's what happens. And you have to form, if you want something different, you have to do something different. And oftentimes doing comes from thinking. You got to think different. In counseling, we call that metacognition, right? You're thinking about your thinking.
Okay.
Is what you're doing. You're intentionally catching yourself and saying, oh, okay, no, I can't think that way. And there was a time in my life when I could not remember one thing positive that my mom offered. Not one.
Whoa.
Now who's the crazy boy, right?
Yeah.
Was that true? No.
No, of course not.
That's just where you let your mind go.
Of course not. Because here's the thing.
Yeah.
My mom was always helping people.
Okay.
Oh, it was crazy the time. I can remember time after time after time. It was a couple that we knew that he had committed suicide, and there was 4 kids, and they lived in this single wide trailer in the middle of nowhere, Colorado. And, you know, we went for an entire weekend and cleaned the whole trailer and took loads of laundry home and all this stuff. We were firewood cutters, right?
Okay.
That's how we heated our house in the winter. And we're up, you know, cutting firewood up in the mountains, and there was somebody that was broke down, and we spend the next 4 hours helping them.
Okay.
Like, that's just over and over and over. Well, is it any wonder why I help people? Right?
Wow.
That's dear old mom.
Yeah.
Right? That's what I'm saying. Like, you can't separate those things. You can't do that and be honest. That's just not the case.
Because at that time, to go back to something you said way early on, you were experiencing that because you were part of helping, but you were also observing it, right? There were 3 things. I can't remember what the other one was, but definitely you were observing that happening. And then
you bet
it was like, you're going to help too. You weren't just going to watch.
Yeah, you bet. And that's a very important thing in parenting, is maybe the most important thing, is very understudied: consistency. Be consistent.
Yeah.
Be consistent. It follows a biblical principle. Let your yes be yes and your no be no.
Okay.
And that for mom and dad, they were always doing stuff like that. We were helping. You know, Quincy Hines was our neighbor. He is a genuine old school Colorado cowboy. Great guy. And he's still alive. I go back and see him when we're back there. He's a great guy. We were always helping him hay. You know, I mean, it was that idea that mom, and unknowingly at the time, that was mom ingrained into me.
Wow.
So
last question, I promise. Did it did you eventually, I mean, you had to have closure at some point. And it was the closure just like, look, I forgive, I recognize where I was wrong, and she is proud of you and your progress. And so you don't really have a heart to heart, come to Jesus moment where you both have closure. Did you have that conversation? Did you ever have the like, look, I'm sorry. And she says, like, I'm sorry too.
Yes.
Okay.
And that was a very, very pivotal moment in our relationship.
Who initiated that?
She did.
Wow.
And that was a really, really, again, that was a really, really positive thing, because you always look to your mom and dad to be an example, right? And here they are, doing that.
Yeah.
And so that was a really, really impactful thing for me.
Look, I appreciate you being so vulnerable to share that. I subscribe to the mindset that facts tell, stories sell. And, somebody who's got a testimony and a story that somebody who could potentially relate to, that speaks and resonates, I think, with people more than just facts. And so that's kind of why I wanted to dig in there a little bit, just to get to know you a little bit better. And I think that, and of course, keep in mind that, like, I learned about that from doing this podcast too, that my testimony, while it was supposed to be therapy for me, I realized was medicine for others too, who are reaching out, people that I didn't even know, that like, hey, thank you for saying that. I don't feel alone anymore. I don't feel as ashamed. And so I think maybe if somebody who's going through similar situations that you went through, or maybe there's a parent who's got a child who's much like you were at that age, then it, just being told what the facts are of the situation doesn't resonate as much as maybe what the story is and what the outcome was.
Agreed.
So
Agreed.
How can and how will the Heartland Premier Charity Golf Classic and the auction that we do the next night at the actual Heartland Premier event at Stony Creek Hotel and Conference Center on June 17th, again, the golf tournament on the 16th, you can get signed up for that golf tournament at some point at heartlandbowhunter.com. How will the money that we raise benefit Peace Partnership?
It will benefit us greatly, because all of the money that generous people give to us, it goes directly to the services that we provide to clients. So it goes right back into people in our community that we help. One of the things that we do, we basically offer services in two areas. And one of the things that this money is going to go fund is we have partnered with area school districts. We've partnered with the Independent School District, and we partnered with the Blue Springs School District.
Okay.
And we're in 5 schools. We're in 3 schools in Blue Springs and 2 schools in the Independent School District. And we put counselors in those schools, and we partner with them. And we basically say to the school counselor and the principal, hey, who are your at-risk kiddos that if they had some help, these are all elementary schools, that if they had some help, these kids would just take off. And we identify those kids. We send, parent permission slips home. And then we work with those kids once a week for the entire school year, free of charge.
Wow.
Because these kids are in such poverty that they cannot afford to even drive to our office. And so we have to go to them.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what we're going to do. So that's where a lot of our funding goes, is to help our school kiddos.
I'm scared to ask this question because it may not be fair, but we raised about $23,000 last year for Restoration House, now known as Rehope. I'm hoping to exceed that. And so I'm hoping that by asking this question, it might inspire people to get involved, maybe make a contribution, even if they can't be involved with ARMVIT, get more familiar with your guys' organization, Peace Partnership, to maybe make a individual personal contribution or donation. Let's hypothetically say we do 23,000 again. What does that do? You have a way of scaling it or itemizing it? What would $23,000 right here, hand it over? What does that do for the organization immediately?
Well,
like, do you have it? Well, let me ask you this way. Do you have an initiative to where you want to get into more schools? Like, do you guys have future goals to where, like, hey, if we had that extra $23,000, it wouldn't just be this many schools in Blue Springs and in Grain Valley or wherever. Now we could go and attack the goal that we had. What are the future goals for Peace Partnership?
So what we would like to do, and right now I'm looking for another therapist to hire so that we can expand not only our in-office services, but also our in-school services. Our in-school services, we've been doing them now for 9 years. We've been offering them to schools for 9 years, and we've grown from 1 school to 5. And that's exactly where that money would go.
Yeah,
it would go to grow that, because we have schools that are kind of in the queue, so to speak, that our model works.
Yeah,
it just works. We measure it on 3 metrics. We measure it on attendance, we measure it on academics, and major disciplinary referrals to the office.
Okay.
And over the 9 years we've been doing this, the attendance has risen 60% with the kids that we work with. The academics has risen 12%, but we're really not, that's not what we're there for, but it has risen. And the major disciplinary referrals have dropped 44% with the kids that we work with. And again, like, that gets attention of school administrators. And so that's what we hope to do, is to continue to grow that. And we're currently in talks. As a matter of fact, next week I have a meeting with the independent school district to see how we can't grow that relationship.
That's great.
Yeah. Our average session fee is about $30. I think last year it was about $30. So if that breaks it down for the listeners too, that like, well, how much, how many counseling sessions does $23,000 pay for? Well, divide that by $30.
Okay.
So that's hundreds and hundreds of counseling sessions.
Sure.
So,
no, that's what I was looking for, is just to offer some sort of perspective on, how much we could potentially help Peace Partnership with this event. And we're excited to do that. Doggone it. Okay. So the last thing I guess I have, unless Jillian, you have anything, was just that, mental health, mental illness is at an all-time high. And probably for a lot of different reasons that we don't have time to get into, because I think you got to be somewhere at 4 and it's 20 till. So we got to rush through this. But, I guess if somebody who's listening to this, maybe they don't need the help, but they know somebody who does. What is it how do they encourage someone to seek you out? And what's the process of seeking you out?
So our website is peacecounseling.org.
Okay.
You can get a hold of us that way. Our phone number is 816-886-0195.
Okay.
And they call in. You're going to talk to our office coordinator. Her name is Erin, and you'll most likely get Erin, and unless she's busy.
Sure.
And you'll get Erin, and Erin then will take some brief information, just kind of a very broad overview of what's going on in your life. And then what we do is we kind of custom fit people to the counselor, because we all specialize. We're not generalists. We all specialize in different things. And so different people need different things. And so if you're struggling with a marriage issue, you'll probably go to Regina, because Regina, that is her thing.
Okay.
Individual issues, I do a lot of individual work.
Okay.
That kind of thing. So that's the process.
Okay. What if whether there's a situation where, like, I have a friend who's down on their luck, they're suicidal. I need to get them help. But they're so, that person who needs the help is so, what's the word I'm looking for? Confused, just distraught, and doesn't have the energy or the capacity to understand that they need to help to call someone. Do you have the ability to take that call from the friend to say, I've got a friend who needs help? How would you help navigate someone through that?
That would probably be a call that's a little bit out of our lane.
Okay.
When they're in that state of crisis. Now, we do work with people who, if they're not in the midst of suicide, but they have some suicidal ideation, or they're thinking about that, or they have thought about that in the past, we absolutely work with those people. But if they're in the midst of that, and if that, let's say on a scale of 1 to 10, like that's a 9 or a 10, like they've got a plan in place, those types of things, that would be a call to a psychiatric facility. That'd be a call to a psychiatric hospital.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think outside the box here of ways that we can help people, because most times people who are going through what they're going through either don't want the help, they don't think they need the help, or they're too ashamed to ask for the help. And so how can we get them the help in some way, shape, or form?
Yeah.
You know, and that's ultimately what I'm asking. So suicide, you know, that might have been a little extreme. That certainly makes sense with your answer, but I want to give people the information and the resources to put them in a position to, when they see something that is wrong, they have the tools on their belt to help that person.
Yeah.
And get that person there.
Yeah.
And so I was just curious if if you ever do get calls where someone says, "Hey, I'm not the person with the problem, but I do have a person with the problem. How can I help them?"
You bet. Tell them, one of the key differences between adults and children, well, don't tell them this, okay? But,
Okay.
But, one of the key differences between adults and children is the issue of advocacy.
Okay.
Children cannot advocate for themselves. Adults can.
Okay. You
have to be willing to pick up the phone and call. We will help you. There is no shame in that. There's nothing that I'm mentally ill. No, we just don't see it that way. Okay. But you have to be willing to call, because there has to be buy-in. People have to say, okay, I need help. And if people can, humble themselves and participate in that, that's going to be very, very beneficial for them.
Thank you so much for being here, man. I want you to come back. You could be like the Dr. John Thompson to the Papa Ron show. Could be like the Dr. Phil to Oprah. We could sit here and talk about a variety of different issues and take questions from. Yes.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. That'd be fun. Actually,
let's do it. Let's not make this the first and last time that you come onto the Papa Ron podcast. I would love to have you back. It has been so fun talking to you. We're going to make sure that this isn't worth, or we're going to try to make this worth your time. You might remember Brown Piercy Cattle Company is a great sponsor of the Papa Ron podcast. And so they have a gift box that they're going to send you.
Oh, wow.
4 premium thick cut steaks, 4 of their famous steak burgers, and 2 family size roasts, along with 4 pounds of 93% lean ground beef.
Oh, wow.
If you think you and Naomi would enjoy that.
Oh, 100%.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you for your insight and being vulnerable and telling your story. And we're excited as Heartland Bowhunter and Heartland Waterfowl make Peace Partnership the beneficiary of the Heartland Premier Charity Golf Classic. Again, June 16th at Adams Point. We'll have auction events for a live auction that will follow the next night, June 17th at Stony Creek Hotel Conference Center. And that is, by the way, absolutely free to get into that premier event. It will cost to get into the golf tournament, and you'll be able to find all that information on heartlandbowhunter.com. This has been a ton of fun. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
For Jillian Gregg and Dr. John Thompson from Peace Partnership, I'm Ronnie Phillips. Thanks for listening to episode 34 of the Papa Ron Podcast.
You've been listening to the Papa Ron Podcast. If you enjoyed this podcast, hit subscribe now on the podcast platform. Follow the Papa Ron Podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok.
And while you're there, like, comment, and share.
Until next time, thanks for listening to the Papa Ron Podcast.
Papa Ron Podcast. Papa Ron Podcast.